Okay, that was Jen.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Today is Monday, July 28th, 2025. This is a work session of the City of Florence. Okay, thank you all for being here. Today is Monday, July 28th, 2025. This is a work session of the City of Philomath City Council. We're going to call this to order. If there is anyone watching online, we apologize. Some places this meeting was noticed as 5:30, and other places this meeting was noticed as 6. So if anyone was waiting around for us, we apologize for the delay. And we will get started with a roll call before we dive into our business for the day.
Present. Diane Crocker.
Yeah.
Spencer Irwin.
Present.
Teresa Nielsen.
Here.
Rick Salsa.
I saw his mouth move.
Present.
Or McMorrin.
Present. And then maybe just since we have some folks joining us, the staff want to introduce yourselves.
Chris Workman, City Manager.
Mike Brzezinski, Finance Director.
Ashley DeGill, City Attorney from Barry Alter.
Chelsea Starner, Assistant City Manager.
Kevin Fair, Philomath Public Works.
And then maybe our consulting guests.
Hello, good evening. My name is Jen Tavansis with Raftelis Financial Consultants.
And I'm Elsa Marie Mullins with Raftelis.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for being here. As just a quick overview of the agenda, we have this work session with just the City Council to go over the utility rate study, and then we'll take probably a quick recess since we just sort of had a extended unplanned recess. And then we will return for another work session together with our planning commissioners, with Ashley walking us through some land use training and legislative updates. So with that, should I turn it over to you, Chris, or straight into, to Mike? Okay, I don't know who's, turn it over to Mike.
Okay. What you have in front of you, a first run at rate study. Got a lot of data in here. You've got an hour to do it, and Jim and Elsa Marie will go right through it really quick. So if you got questions, either involve them. I don't know. You guys are pretty good about your questions. So hopefully it's cleared up. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Jen and Elsa Marie. Let them take off.
Great, thank you so much. Let me start by sharing my screen, my correct screen. All right, can everyone see just the cover of a slide deck? Okay, yes. Perfect. Great. Well, thank you all again for having us here tonight. It's been a pleasure
Jen,
working with you.
Just so you know,
Yes.
the screen you're sharing is sort of vertical, so it's showing up very small on our end. I don't know if that makes any sense.
And now you're muted.
Yep, you're muted.
Yep, I see that. Is this any better? Does this show up better for you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
All right, sure thing. My gosh. All right. I just want to make sure I can see a couple of notes on the side here. So thank you again for having us. I will say, to his credit, Mike tried to get us on half an hour ago, but I didn't see the notice until just a few minutes. So apologies for the delay here.
No worries.
Again, my name is Jen Tavansis. I'm a vice president with Raftelis, and with me today I've got Elsa Marie Mullins, who's a senior consultant and was the kind of key analyst on this project. So she will help me along the way and help answer any questions that may come up. First, if you haven't heard of our firm, Raftellus is a firm specializing in local government and utility financial planning and management consulting. We've got nearly 200, or possibly at this point over 200 consultants across the US. We work with many, many, many agencies. So just wanted to kind of share a little bit of background. What we're going to bring to you tonight does include some kind of industry best practice type recommendations. And so they do come with this sort of background and lots of experience within our firm. Again, just introduce ourselves, but you can see us on screen and our pictures now too. Myself, Jen Tavansis, and Elsa Marie Mullins. Let me see if I can shift this just a little bit without upsetting the delicate balance here. All right, so my team worked with city staff on a cost of service and rate study for your water, sewer, and storm drain utilities. Within these studies, we focused on two basic things. First, the amount of revenue needed to support your utilities in the coming years, as well as the way those revenues are recovered from your utility customers. So we're characterizing this for discussion purposes tonight as sort of the size of the pie. That's the total amount of revenue that we're talking about, and how you slice the pie. So that's how that revenue is recovered. You'll see these two little icons throughout. They're a visual indicator for me and for you on kind of which piece of this we're talking about. The focus tonight is really on the rate design piece, so how you slice the pie. The revenue requirement is, in a sense, it is what it is. We have the sort of the obligations that we have, and we'll talk about what those are. But we really want to get some good feedback and discussion on the rate design piece. We'll start though with the size of the pie. So the first step in the study is really to figure out how much revenue your rates need to generate year over year, which can be more complex than just your single year's expenses. So the first thing we did was develop a financial plan for each of your utilities. We gathered data on customer usage and billing, your operating expenses, your beginning cash position, and then we worked pretty extensively with staff to look at the capital projects that are planned, which are a driving factor, especially for the water utility. For all the utilities, we aim to meet fiscal policies or targets, and all of that information fed into the annual revenue requirement, which is, again, the amount we seek to recover through rates. Tonight, we'll focus on these findings. We conducted a detailed cost of service analysis to understand how your system costs, both capital assets and operating costs, as well as maintenance expenses, are allocated to each customer class. The customer classes that you all have sort of within your billing system and differentiated within your rate structure are here. I want to point out another set of icons, and I promise this is the last one, but as we sort of talk about some of these rate design elements, we will distinguish between recommendations that kind of represent an industry best practice and those that represent more of a policy decision. All right. So we'll start with water. And this is the bulk of the topics tonight. So we might spend most of the time on water, and that's okay. All right. First and foremost, the size of the pie. For this analysis, we projected rates for fiscal year 2027, which begins, of course, July 2026. The estimated revenue needed in FY 2027 is about $2.4 million. Some key drivers for that include capital projects, which we'll talk about more in just a moment, particularly the treatment plant. And this does represent about a 24% increase over the revenue that we calculated for FY26, current fiscal year. Now, I do want to point out when we're sort of presenting rates throughout this presentation, we will be talking about target rates that sort of satisfy the FY 2027 revenue requirement. Some of the increases are substantial. And so I understand that it may not be kind of feasible to take that whole step in one go. So we can certainly talk about kind of a phased implementation or a stepwise approach to making any of the adjustments that you all see as appropriate to make. Doing a more phased approach would change the numbers a bit. So I just want to kind of be clear that the numbers here are sort of representative of the FY27 values. And they're also representative of the kind of rate design that's proposed, but we will make any adjustments needed after our discussion tonight. All right. The FY27 target number is built up from, of course, your operating and maintenance expenses, as well as some capital projects. We documented some of the notable capital projects over the next 3 years. And hopefully it's kind of helpful to see that those projects are not all paid for by your rate revenue. So a portion of it does come from rates, a portion from your system development charges, so charges associated with growth that are intended to kind of pay for that growth-related capital investments that are needed. A good chunk of it from grants. Now, that's not always the case, but in this planning period, it is. And then a portion to be borrowed to pay for some near-term projects and paid back with rate revenue over time. So there's sort of a mix of funding in here, which is accounted for in the financial plan. I thought it might be helpful just to quickly review your current rate structure and rates on the water side. The current structure includes a monthly base charge and a volumetric charge per unit of water used. Throughout this presentation and in your current rate structure and communication about it, a unit of usage is equal to 100 cubic feet or 748 gallons. So we'll keep calling it a unit. That's sort of the definition there. So the volumetric charge per unit, $6.55. For non-residential or multifamily commercial and industrial customers, the structure is similar. So the base charge is currently based on meter size, except for multifamily residential, where the base charge is sort of the smallest meter charge multiplied by the number of units, multiplied by a factor of 0.5. So basically half a charge per unit. There's also a modest fire line standby charge, which I will point out because we're going to talk in some detail about that later. These customers have a volumetric charge based on water consumed at $6.80 per unit. All right, regarding water rates, we explored several kind of key elements here. And we're going to talk through the topics, any recommendations, and get some feedback from you all on these items here. So fixed to variable charge ratio, that is how much revenue is recovered from a fixed charge versus a variable charge, which we always examine as part of developing a utilities financial plan. We'll look at the multifamily residential base charges in particular, since those are kind of a special case within your current rate structure. Tiered volumetric rates for residential customers. which adds a little additional kind of nuance to your volumetric charge approach, an elevation surcharge, and then fire line and hydrant charges. I think I mentioned this a few slides ago, but just in case, again, we'll kind of differentiate between industry best practice and policy decisions as we go. So first, fixed and variable revenue ratio. Currently, you all are recovering about 25% of your revenue from those fixed charges, so those meter-based charges. We recommend increasing that to 30%. It means more revenue stability. The way we've modeled this, every account would receive a charge proportional to its meter size, and increasing the percentage of revenue that comes from the fixed element means that overall the fixed charge would be increased at a greater percentage than the volumetric charge. So it is our recommendation to increase that. And I know this is a lot of numbers to throw at you, but I think it may be helpful to just sort of see the scale that we're talking about here. So we're showing the 2026 rates that were recently adopted as compared to the 2027 rates we have calculated and the relative increase. So in 2026, the rates were differentiated a bit for the smaller meters between res and non-res. We had them modeled and we continue to have them modeled as more standard by meter size. So the increase is variable for those two meter sizes, but otherwise it's approximately a 31% increase for each of these meter sizes. And I think before I proceed, I'll just pause for a moment to see if anyone has immediate questions or thoughts or comments on that topic. And if not, I can kind of continue to run through the water-related topics, and we can revisit all of them comprehensively.
I think Councilor Crocker has a question.
Okay.
I had a
yes, please.
question on the elevation surcharge for Starlight and Meeback Hill. What is that? How much is it? Why is it done?
Great question. Sorry, I was not fast enough to mute. I hope I'm not causing an echo over here.
No, you're good.
Well, if you can hang on just
Yep.
7 minutes, we will get there. I've got the numbers and the kind of justification.
Great.
Okay. Yep, of
Any
course.
other questions just about the fixed and variable rates and everything so far?
I just have one question.
Yeah, Councilor Nielsen.
It's on the cost of service, the FY page, FY 2027. It says over the next 3 years, capital projects are funded. How were these calculations, how did you come to these calculations of 12% for rates, 9% for SDCs? How did we come up with those calculations?
Yep, great question. Each of these projects has kind of a funding source identified by the city. And so the SDC projects and the grant funded projects are kind of have specific funding sources attached to them. The remainder of the projects are to be funded through, current year revenue or fund balance, or because there are a number of capital project needs in the relatively near term, like more than we could reasonably attempt to fund with increased rates. We do have some borrowing built in this fiscal year, FY 26, that gets paid back over 30 years. So those proportions are kind of depending on what funding approach is associated with each project.
That I think Mike wanted to chime in.
You said that the revenues come from the CIP. We gave them the current CIP that was just adopted.
Okay.
So that's where a lot of these numbers
Thank you.
will be coming from.
All right.
I looked at it too, going, where's that coming?
Thank you. I was like, going, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Mhm.
Where did it come from?
Oh, yeah, Councilor Andrade?
Can you refresh my memory slash I might not have heard this, and you might have said it already. The 3/4 and the 1-inch meter size. So currently we have it as residents, resident and non-resident charges, but your recommendation is going to be getting rid of that residential, non-residential category for these base meter charges. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I will say in prior years, you've had more sort of equivalence between those two classes in your meter charges. And from a cost of service standpoint, it does make sense to kind of keep that equivalence because we're talking about kind of readiness to serve and capacity related considerations, which exist essentially no matter what kind of customer you are.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I think we can continue on. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right. Jump ahead a little bit. Oops, that was too far. All right, so this topic is kind of a subset of the meter charge topic, but it's worth calling out because again, this is sort of a special case that you all have in your current rate structure. Currently, the charge for multifamily accounts is 50% of the 3/4 inch charge, which is the lowest meter charge, multiplied by the number of units served by a particular meter. Again, for the same reason that I sort of just described, the kind of readiness to serve and capacity related costs that really have much more to do with the size of the meter. We recommend just sort of bringing those multifamily customers into the overall per meter size standard structure for the fixed charges. This is absolutely in line with kind of industry best practice. It puts you more on par with kind of what peer communities are doing and what's typical within the industry. So we do recommend making that change to sort of phase out the different approach for multifamily residential customers. So any immediate thoughts on that?
Yeah, Councilor Andrade?
So to clarify, are you saying that we should, from what I understand, we use for multifamily residents, we have larger units, or sorry, larger meter sizes, and that's the reason for the way that our charges are, like why we have it the way that we do. So is that correct, I guess? And are you suggesting that we make it so that every unit in like an apartment complex has a water meter as opposed to just, because don't we just have one large water meter that is shared by all of an apartment complex?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let me clarify because our recommendation is certainly not that you change the way you're metering those customers, just that you change the way you're charging that water base charge for those customers.
Okay.
So currently you do have multifamily customers with a range of meter sizes, everything from 3/4 to I think 6 inches was the biggest that I had seen. But that meter size doesn't actually drive the charge they're currently charged. Rather, it looks at the number of units being served by a particular meter and calculates the charge that way. So to sort of bring it in alignment with the other meter-based charges and the costs allocated to them, we recommend just doing away with that 50% method and just saying if it's a 6-inch meter, it gets charged the 6-inch meter charge, no matter how many units. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see. Okay. Per meter charge. Okay. Per meter charge, this is for the base rate as opposed. Okay.
That's right.
Part of it is like the confusion between the base and the volumetric.
Right.
And where that 50% comes in. Thank you.
So then the individual apartments would just pay the metered rate, and the base, or meter rate plus their share of whatever
Like,
the base rate, yeah, the volume rate, and then the meter charge would be whatever. Okay. Does anybody know if there's a reason why we have a weird way now? Did we have some odd equipment or something, or is it just how we
It's got
do it?
established a long time ago, and I don't think we had a lot of really big water meter size users. I think there was concern about smaller meters serving large number of units that wouldn't necessarily capture as much as we were wanting to. And I don't know that we're seeing that anymore. So, yeah, I wasn't here when that got established a long time ago. I can just say it's all for 12 years. It's difficult to explain on why we do it that way, other than it was some effort to try to be more equitable on the amount of water actually being used. But for a base rate, the most equitable way to do it is the meter size, right? I mean, it's what we do with everybody else. So I think this does bring us into standard. I like the recommendation.
Council Crocker.
Am I understanding that you're averaging the cost to each of the apartment or mobile home users so that somebody that uses a lot of water will still pay the same amount as somebody that uses very little water? Is that how we're doing it?
No, we haven't started talking about the volumetric charges yet. So that is still an element of the rate structure that we will certainly retain. It's important to charge people for the amount of water they use. This is strictly the base charge, which is done mostly by meter size currently, and we recommend doing it entirely by meter size.
So the RV park has 1 meter, right? And so you're just dividing that cost by,
This is saying that whoever has the account for the meter will pay the base charge for that. So like Boulevard Apartments, I think, is all on one giant meter. And so the Boulevard Apartments would pay the base rate for that meter every month. And then they would also pay the whatever volumetric charge based on how much all the residents use. Then it's up to the owner of the Boulevard Apartments how they want to charge their residents for utility. If they just want to charge them $50 a month, or they want to just bake it into the rent or whatever. But it's just up to the utility account holder to pay that.
It wouldn't be artificially creating that previous base charge.
Right. Yeah. Because I think the idea is like, they don't really care if your one giant meter is serving 1,000 units or it's serving just you. It's
then
just
they're
one
measuring
guy.
the amount of water that's going through that
Right,
meter. I
exactly.
get
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But still, how do they know what apartment's using what? I don't understand. With just 1 meter, how do they?
They may not. That would be their.
I can, yeah. I can just say,
Like I said, for
Yeah, it's up to the apartments. I can just say, because my daughter just rented at one of the apartment complexes in town, and they just charge they split it up between every unit based off how many people the unit is for. So if it's like a 2-person unit, you have a charge. 3-person is a charge, 1 person has a charge. So it's up to the apartment complex how they're doing that.
it is average then. It's not individual
Right.
usage.
So, I mean, unless they have individual meters at like a mobile home park, sometimes they do.
Yeah, one quick yes or no question, hopefully. The meter size is based on the supply and like
size of the
3/4 to 3/4 inch delivery, or?
Based on, yeah, it's calculated by the engineers on how much water is going to be needed on that development. That's usually based on fixtures.
And then this is pipe size, it presumes, because it's in inches roughly, or?
Yeah, it's the pipe is coming out and then the meter's going on there to size it appropriately for what's going to get through the meter.
Yeah.
You could have an 8-inch meter, or excuse me, an 8-inch water line, but you're going to hook a 4-inch meter up to it. So it's going to limit the amount of water coming out of that 8-inch pipe to no more than the 4-inch.
And then, so it's actually the size of the other end of
It can vary depending on what the
house
water
end,
main
it's the size of the house end of the pipe though.
That would be the 4-inch or the 2-inch.
Right. So this is representative of the owner side, or the
owner side.
property side of the,
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Let's keep on moving. We're about halfway through the hour. Now we can talk about the volumetric element of the charge. So again, the water charges have both the base rate and the volumetric rate. Currently, all of the usage is charged at a single rate per unit. And what we want to introduce for your consideration is a concept of tiered volumetric charges for your residential customers. So we explored adding a volumetric tier specifically for the residential customer class. Again, there's a flat rate for each unit that's used, each unit again being 100 cubic feet. To meet the revenue requirement, if we kept the sort of flat rate, same rate for each unit approach, we'd be looking at about an 18% increase over FY26 rates to meet the FY27 revenue requirement. Alternatively, we wanted to consider a two-tiered approach. In the following slide, we'll compare the flat rate to a two-tiered structure. The way two tiers would work is essentially all usage that on a given month's bill, all usage that falls between 0 and the cutoff for the first tier, which we have modeled as 12 units, would be billed at a lower rate. And then all usage that's above that threshold, which again is set at 12 units, would be billed at a slightly higher rate. In the data that we were looking at, which was FY24 data, fewer than 10% of bills were over 12 units of usage. So we're talking about a relatively small portion of those residential customer bills. And what this really does is it encourages conservation. So we can generate the same amount of revenue if we tweak those rates a little bit. And I will show you that comparison in the next slide here. So for FY 2026, currently the charge for residential usage is $6.55 per unit. For FY 27, if we were to keep that kind of uniform flat charge, we'd be looking at $7.71 per unit, and that would be applied to 100% of the usage, 100% of the residential bills. If instead we did a tiered structure, we would be looking at a higher rate than currently, but lower than uniform for the first 12 units, so $6.99. That would apply to most of the usage and nearly all of the bills. And then any usage over that would be charged at a higher rate, which we have calculated at $10.48. I want to point out that we did have a number of discussions about the 12-unit cutoff, and every community is different, of course, but in the city of Philomath, the average monthly usage for fiscal year 24 was just over 8 units per month. This is actually a little bit higher than what we've seen in other communities where there's maybe less outdoor space. And there are also a number of studies available that kind of peg typical indoor water usage at around 5.5 units a month. So we have a couple of good benchmarks that show that kind of indoor non-irrigation type water use falls well within this threshold for typical households. Now, of course, there are larger households. There are customers who enjoy gardening. There are plenty of good uses for water. Our goal was to set this high enough to certainly not negatively impact any customers unnecessarily. And again, I will say that the first 12 units are kind of charged at that lower rate, even if you do go above the threshold. So I think this is this has been a good discussion so far. It can continue to be a good discussion if you all have thoughts on that threshold there, or if you have thoughts on the two-tiered system at all. But again, as kind of a primary point, it certainly does serve to encourage conservation, kind of potentially limit the irrigation, which would be the usage that pushes people up over that threshold in some of the summer months. So this is another kind of point for discussion with council. And this is really a policy choice. It is perfectly valid to keep a uniform structure. It is perfectly valid to kind of promote conservation through a two-tiered structure. So I'm interested in any thoughts you have.
Yeah, and just before, I think, let's try not to do too much discussing of our thoughts right now, just for the sake of time. We can do that at a later meeting, but.
I hope this is just a clarifying question.
Yeah, Councilor
So
Irwin.
if I were to use 12, actually say I was able to use 15 units of water, is this structure saying that my first 12 are charged at $6.99 and the three that are, so it's really like a premium on the overage?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't be like, dang, dude, you used 15 and now you're paying all your
Nope.
units.
Nope.
Okay, cool.
The way you
So
described it is
really
exactly
not.
right. Yep.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, great. Then more discussion to be had at another time, and we'll keep moving on here. For non-residential customers, we propose keeping the flat rate, uniform rate, but increasing that charge from 680 to 771. Again, that brings it into alignment with the would-be flat residential charge, and it represents about a 13% increase over the FY26 charges. All right, elevation surcharge. The elevation surcharge is an add-on to a volumetric charge. So whether
Really
it's
quick,
flat.
sorry, Jen. Sorry, we had one clarifying question on the last one that I missed because I was taking a note.
For the flat, you said you recommended the flat rate for the multifamily, commercial and industrial rate. Is that like regardless of whether we do a tiered rate, or are you saying, I guess, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Yes, that's right. So the tiered rate proposal is limited to the residential customers, and it again sort of differentiates between indoor and or is designed to differentiate between indoor and outdoor use. Obviously, it's not metered separately, but that's the intention there. Regardless of how the residential side is structured, we recommend a flat rate on the non-residential side, so multifamily, commercial, and industrial. Usage patterns are different for those customers, and there's not as clear a threshold to sort of design a simple tiered approach around those. So yes, that's our recommendation. Our recommendation,
Thank you.
excuse me, is sort of irrespective of where you go on the residential side.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Nope, not at all.
I think we can continue.
Please do it again if I miss something in the video.
Will do.
All right, the elevation surcharge. So again, this would be a volumetric rate surcharge for customers at higher elevations specifically to recover costs associated with pumping water to those higher elevation zones. And so that includes maintenance, repair, future replacement of pump stations. Again, this was sort of developed through the cost of service studies. So we identified and those costs specifically associated with the pump stations, including their electric costs and maintenance and so on, and figured out what that surcharge would be if we allocated those costs to the customers served in those higher elevation zones. Sorry to repeat, but just in case it didn't come across before, this surcharge would apply per volumetric unit, regardless of whether you go with a kind of flat rate or a two-tiered rate for your residential customers. And what that would look like, since I know that's the big question, is another 74 cents per unit for those customers in the elevated areas. I just wanted for context to share that about 7.5% of the residential usage is in those zones. So it's a relatively small group of customers, but it's not an insignificant rate. So I just want to make sure you have that for consideration. And because those costs would then not be recovered from the overall customer base, we would be looking at a decrease in other usage charges of about 6 cents per unit. So I'll take your note, and we don't have to discuss right this moment, but if anyone has a question, I'm happy to answer.
I guess I was just curious why you're recommending to do that on the unit instead of on the base fee.
The recommendation is really more because it's about moving the volume of water to these locations. There could be an argument perhaps to be made that readiness to serve is a more costly thing in those zones. So I'm sure there's an argument to be made either way, but we
Yeah.
associate it with the distribution of water.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Councilor Andrade?
Can you elaborate on that bullet that you had talked about with the standard volumetric charge impact? I don't quite understand what you're getting at with it being a decrease because we didn't have an elevation surcharge.
I think, yeah, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's saying that if we have an elevation surcharge, then everyone else's rates will go down by
Oh,
6 cents because they're.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep. Exactly.
So we've never had an elevation, and now we're saying, and I get that there's pumps that need to work. I get that that's for them. But it's almost seems like something we should be negotiating with instead of just saying, well, you live on a hill, so even though you've lived there for 50 years and you've paid what everybody else has paid, you're now going to pay more because you live on a hill.
I think I hear you. Let's save our sort of policy decisions for a later meeting just because I want to make sure we get through this in time. But yeah. Okay, I think please carry on.
Okay, perfect. Yep, and this one is absolutely a policy decision. It is done both ways. All right, I just want to share some residential bill impacts, comparing kind of the flat rate approach with the two-tier approach under the sort of rate design that we've talked about before. Again, these numbers can and will change depending on how the policy decisions shake out. But we've got here on the left a sample customer using 5 units of water. So their current bill this year is $50.75, and this is a 3/4 inch customer. Under a flat rate approach, their bill would go up about 24%. So that's just about the amount of additional revenue needed for the water utility. So that's right in alignment there. Under a two-tiered approach, their bill would only go up 17% because they're sort of benefiting from the lower volumetric rate in the first tier. On the other hand, a 20-unit customer, if we were under the flat rate approach, their bill would go up 17%. Now that's a little lower because we've shifted more of those costs to the base charge and less of the cost to the volumetric charge. So they benefit a little bit from that proposal. But then on the flip side, if they use that same amount of water under the two-tier structure, the rates or the charge goes up by 29%, so even more. So I know this is a lot to take in, and there are a number of kind of levers that we have discussed that can be pulled. But in case it's helpful, I just wanted to sort of visualize some of these impacts under these scenarios here. And then there's one other important topic on the water side, and that's for private fire charges. As part of the cost of service analysis, we incorporated fire charges and associated costs. That includes public fire costs for hydrants and line, as well as private fire costs. So customers with fire protection, such as standby pipes or sprinklers, on their property, they're currently charged a fee of $15.20 per month. The standby fee is meant to recover the cost of providing fire flow capacity, which can be significantly greater than normal flow, and it does represent an added demand on your system. It requires larger pipes and increased storage to provide the necessary pressure and capacity for fire situations. Currently, the system has 37 private hydrants and 27 private lines. Only the lines are being charged. The hydrants are not being charged separately. But charging for private hydrants, which can also be used for fire suppression, also kind of accounts for the greater system capacity required here. So our proposal here, which is a best practice and a policy decision, let's talk about that in a second, is to kind of adjust the current fire line standby capacity charge of 15-20, kind of regardless of the size of the line, to have that scale more with the size of the line, so it kind of better represents the different demand placed on the system. Now, the sort of true numbers that represent the differentiated demand are much more differentiated. So they would go from a much smaller number to a much bigger number. We're treating this in conversation with staff. We're kind of treating this as a step in the right direction. So some differentiation here between those smaller lines and those much larger lines. And then we're also suggesting a per hydrant fee to kind of cover some of those costs that apply to hydrants just as they do to private fire lines. This is an industry best practice. So we've got that icon here. The fact that we've sort of scaled it down a little bit, compressed it a little bit, is sort of a policy decision and process. So rather than creating a really big impact for some of these bigger fire line customers, we'll kind of propose to mitigate that a little bit initially, but sort of establish some of that differentiation that can grow in the future. All right, this is just yes.
Well, just since I'm not as familiar with it, so what is this cost per, like, per line, per, like,
Yes.
yard,
Yep.
per but like per meter, per month?
Per line, per month. That's right.
Per line per month. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Significant change.
Yeah.
All right. Now I know I'm under the gun here, so I'm gonna hustle a little bit as we talk about sewer, which is much more straightforward. Sorry, I can't see the video right this second. Is there another question over there?
No, sorry, we were just chuckling.
Okay. All right. So on the sewer side, the current rate structure also includes a monthly base charge and a volumetric charge per unit. This applies to multifamily, commercial, and industrial customers as well. Unlike water, the revenue requirements for sewer for FY27 are pretty well aligned with those for FY26. Now, you all took a big step in kind of increasing your sewer rates just this past year. So we don't think the size of the pie needs to change substantially for sewer, but there may be one way in which we want to talk about the slicing of the pie. On the fixed and volumetric revenue ratio, the base charge and the volumetric charge, we like the split that you currently have. You're at 42% fixed, 58% variable. Your fixed costs are generally higher on the wastewater side, so that's good. We preserve that in our model. The only thing that we kind of looked at tweaking on the sewer side are loading factors. So from a cost of service standpoint, we looked at loading factors which account for higher strength wastewater from commercial and industrial properties like restaurants, distilleries, manufacturing, car washes, laundromats. Those types of facilities tend to have higher strength wastewater that then, is treated by your treatment facility. And it creates a greater burden on the system than, typical residential or, office, sort of lower strength commercial wastewater. So there's certainly a distinction that can be made there. And just for reference, the current rates, base 3720 residential, volumetric 875 per unit, non-residential volumetric 850 per unit. So another sort of distinction there. Our proposal, should you account for loading, would be to sort of equate the residential, multi-residential, and city government and school rates and increase the commercial and industrial rates, which are the classes where those sort of higher strength types of properties fall into. So again, so we don't take a step backwards. We have those lower strength rates modeled at comparable to this year, and then a higher strength sort of surcharge for those commercial and industrial properties. So something for you all to consider. And I will briefly talk about the storm drain fund and revenue needs. For this one, I wanted to show a few years out into the future. The operating expenses on the storm drain fund are expected to increase in the relatively near term, with a new position being added in FY27, and then a portion of new positions being added in subsequent years. The capital kind of expenditures from this fund, and again, capital projects that are unrelated to growth or not paid for by developers, but instead paid for by rate revenue, they sort of fluctuate over time. FY27 is not a huge year in the capital plan, but the next year is. So we're sort of thinking about building up to a more sustainable level of revenue in the storm drain fund. Here, we have a fairly comprehensive recommendation about the rate structure. So, right now your rate structure is based on the amount of impervious area on every property, and that is typical. Impervious area is very closely aligned with the amount of runoff that's generated from a property, and that then has to be handled by your storm drain system. So we like that, and we want to stick with that. The way that sort of is incorporated into your current rate structure is that you have a charge for single family properties, a special low income charge, and then 15 different discrete tiers that other types of properties can fall into. So it's maybe a little hard to see on this graph, but all the way at the bottom, we have kind of impervious area, square footage, and on the side, we've got the current monthly rate. And so essentially everything less than 100,000 square feet, there's a good sort of relationship between that amount of impervious area and the amount they're charged. Once you get out into the bigger tiers, you can have a big sort of difference in that square footage of impervious area where you're still paying the same rate. And so this, I think, is an opportunity for increasing the equity in the rate structure here. If we were to keep the structure the same, what we would be looking at for FY27 is rate increases of about 225% across the board. I know that is a big number. Rates right now are on the lower side for single family properties, but this is still a big number. And so to go back to my earlier statement about stepping up if we need to talk about that. We do have an alternative structure for your consideration, and that's one where the bills are more closely aligned with the actual amount of impervious area in each tier. So they scale kind of more appropriately compared to those tiers, and therefore sort of better represent each property's burden on the system. So in a sense, something that's 100 times as big as a single family house would pay 100 times as much rather than something far less than that, which is the way it's currently set up. This kind of approach would also allow for a reduction to customers who privately manage stormwater through a water quality or detention device in their own property. And that's typically called a credit program. I know we're very short on time, so I want to show sort of the relative change in build units per property if we were to sort of right size that relationship. So especially in the higher end, 515, that's the billing code for that biggest class of properties, but those would see sort of the greatest increase, and then you sort of get to more equivalence in the lower tiers there. Doing that, making that change, there are only a handful of properties in the very high tiers, so it's not a tremendous increase in your units of service. But if you did make that change and acknowledge kind of the relative amount of impervious area, you would end up with a greater number of units of service overall, across which you could sort of spread the costs and the cost recovery. So rate increases wouldn't need to be as severe for your single family and smaller customers. So a rate schedule here, again, you can certainly chew on this after this meeting, but these would be sort of the calculated rates under a redesigned rate structure that accommodates that credit program and otherwise sort of acknowledges the relative burden of each of these properties on the storm drain system. There's all of our things for consideration. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing, and then we have 0 minutes to spare.
Thank you so much. It looks like Councilor Andrade has a quick question.
I appeared to have lost the thread for the billing units relative to impervious area figure. What is the x-axis, the units per property, relative change in units per property? I'm not quite sure what 501 to 500.
Yeah, those are, apologies for that access not being labeled. Those are the rate classes currently. So those are the different categories that your properties are put in the billing system. So the ones furthest to the left, those are the single family properties, and then the smaller commercial properties. And then furthest to the right, those are the biggest commercial properties with the most amount of impervious area on them. So that's what that axis is.
Thank you. And then to make sure I understand correctly, the following figure, the total units of service comparison, the y-axis, it says storm drain fee units of service. So does that mean like individual household or like, storm drain users?
Yeah. Yep. And
Okay.
no, I'm sorry for rushing through this part a bit. What that is summarizing is the total sort of chargeable impervious area units under your current rate structure in the greener color in the left versus an adjusted rate structure in the yellow color on the right. So basically what I'm saying is if you change your structure so that you're kind of more proportionally charging those customers with the biggest amount of impervious area, the total number of units across which you can generate revenue will increase, and therefore the rate per unit doesn't have to increase as much. So it's a move toward kind of improved equity in your cost recovery there, and it can mitigate the impact of that big rate increase number that I showed a few minutes ago a bit.
Cool, thank you very much. That makes a lot more sense.
Well, we are at time. And do we get these fine folks back in the future if we have discussions? So then I think we'll wrap it up there, but think about this, and we'll obviously come back to this as we work on rate settings in the future, and we may get to chat more with our consultants here. But with that, I think we will.
Procedural question. So if we are interested as a council in having them look at, say, like a 3-tier rate schedule for water or something like that, when would they need to know by in order to, you know?
Yesterday.
Well, I mean, this is the first time we're seeing it.
Yeah, it's the first time seeing it. So, think about this, like Christopher said. This is the first time you've seen it, and I know a lot of it, we're probably going to phase it in. So that's something to think about. How would you want to do that? Chris is thinking every 6 months, so I don't know. That's the kind of things we're throwing out there. Right now, do does the council want to look at 3 real quick? Let's do a real quick count, and we can go away and do that.
I just because like I know we're not really supposed to talk about that right now because we're running out of time, but I do think that 12 units is a really high number and that we should look at spreading that cost recovery out over multiple tiers if possible. So I would appreciate that.
We'll look at it. I mean, we could just take it and go with it, Chris.
That was some casual feedback that you got without the council making an official decision in a work session.
Exactly. Just casual feedback.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Okay. With that, I think let's take a 3-minute recess. Does that work for everyone? Okay. We'll do a 3-minute recess, and then we will return with our friends from the Planning Commission at 7:06.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
All right, we are coming back to order. And this is now a work session continuing with the Philomath City Council, now joined by the Philomath Planning Commission, and it's currently 7:06 p.m., right on time. And I think we already did the official roll call for the council, but in lieu of a roll call for the commission, we're excited to be joining together tonight. Could we all maybe just go around and quickly say your name, how long you've been a part of whatever body you're on, and just one quick thing that you like about being on that body. So I'm gonna, instead of starting, I'm gonna end. We'll start with Van.
Let's see, the planning commission I've been on 4 years, maybe, something like that, 4 or 5 years. And I just enjoyed helping give direction for the community that I live in the last 36 years.
Absolutely.
I'm John Barlow. I've been in Philomath for 23 years, and I've been on the planning commission for the last, I think, 2.5, Tim, when we came in. Yeah, so the last 2.5 years, and my favorite thing on planning commission is sitting next to Van.
Pay him later, Beth.
My name is Tim Malott. I'm actually fairly new to the city of Philomath. We've been here a little more than 3 years. And I've been on the planning commission 2.5 years. And I got interested in it because of building a house here in town. And I'm an architect and been in the business for many years. So I enjoy being able to bring a more of a professional or from the user's side opinions and the like into our discussions of looking at redoing zoning and our municipal code.
I'm Josiah Jessen. I've been on the planning commission for 2-ish years. I took over somebody's term and this is into my second term now. And yeah, I just appreciate the opportunity to give back to my community and to be a part of planning future Philomath.
I'm Sarah Coulter Mitchell, and I'm, 4 or 5 months into planning commission? We're about the same. In a past career, I worked for a town or a village of Park Forest, which is a south suburb of Chicago, and staffed a number of commissions, Environment Commission, and was a staff for the Planning Commission, along with the Director of Planning and Economic Development. And so now that I moved to a smaller town and could be involved, I was excited to do so.
Kyle Cupp, first year on the planning commission. It's been a few months, and I think I've enjoyed most just learning all the things that the planning commission does and all the responsibilities that the city has and all the decisions that get made, questions that come.
I'm Diane Crocker. This is my 3rd year. I just started my 2nd term on city council.
And what do you enjoy about council? You like
I'm
nothing.
learning so much stuff.
Spencer Irwin, this is my first term as a city councilor. I've done a bunch of other committees and the Citizens Academy, and that's how they tricked me into all this. What do I enjoy? I think I enjoy, I'm a firm believer that in being a part of the solution, right? Like when, honestly, there weren't like a ton of problems to address, but it's like, I feel like if I'm a part of and I work towards, I just feel better about participating when I am, or the direction we're going when I actually know what we're doing, and I'm proud of where we're going and what we're doing. So.
I'm Jessica Andrade. This is my 5th year as a city councilor, and I also I think we were in the same Citizens Academy in 2019, yeah?
I think so.
Yeah.
About right.
If you haven't done it, do it. It's fantastic.
So fun.
So much fun. And my favorite thing about being a counselor is meeting new people, making new friends, and working together, nerding out, and yeah. It's great.
I am Teresa Nielsen. This is going towards the end of my 2nd term.
I just love Philomath, and so anything that, I mean, the people, the location, there's probably not much I don't love about Philomath. And so being a part of that and having a voice and being able to hear and listen to the citizens and get their input, been pretty wonderful.
I'm Christopher McMorrin. I'm the mayor. I've been mayor since January, and then I was on the council for 2 years before that. And I think my favorite thing about being mayor is, you know, I grew up here, and I feel like I thought I knew a lot about Philomath, but the amount I've learned in the past like 6 months is probably the amount I learned in the 26 years before those 6 months. So I'm enjoying that. Yeah, we'll go to our folks online. Whoever wants to start. Oh, Rose, I think you're muted. Oh, still on mute. Crystal, can you do like the request on? Yeah, ask the ask zone.
Okay, there,
Perfect.
got it. Okay, well, I'm Darlene Rose, and I've been on the Planning Commission for about 3.5 years, and I just really enjoy participating in the discussions and issues that we have within our city and being able to, you know, help make decisions. I'm home today because my dog had dental surgery and my husband is out of town, and so I am watching over him. And Philomath is a great place. I've been here most of my life. I moved away and then I moved back, and I really love participating in this group.
Awesome, thank you. And then Rich.
Yes, my name is Rich Salta, and I was appointed to the City Council in January of this year. Previous to that, I worked for Philomath Fire and Rescue. I was the fire marshal, the deputy fire chief, and numerous other hats. But I got to work with the city staff over time, obviously, in all things building and planning. And that's one of the things I love being on the council about, and being able to keep being with the folks that make a big difference in our community, and being able to work and have a voice on the community itself. So it's great to participate with you all. Some of you I know through my participation in the fire department side. So it's nice to have the full circle complete here tonight.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then do y'all want to just say a quick hello?
Chris Workman, City. Hard to believe we moved here early 2014, so been a while, and I enjoy most being in Philomath. I get to come to work every day to make the community I live in, my family and my friends and people at church and people in the community a little bit better place. So that's what we try to do every single day. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I think I've had a chance to meet everyone at this point. My name is Ashley DeGill. I'm an attorney at Burial Stern Hammond. We're your city attorney's office, though we're a private law firm. And we represent exclusively public entities, so cities, counties, and special districts. I've been representing, I think we talked about this the last time I was here. I've been representing Philomath for 1.5 years, 2 years at this point. And the thing I like most about my job, there are so many things I really like about my job. Maybe just getting to explore Oregon, go around to so many very unique, interesting little communities like Philomath, who just have so much to offer and, you know, are such a unique place to see. And then getting to participate in that local process and see, be a little piece of, I think I heard so many of you say, just be a piece of that local process and see the results of your efforts.
And then last but not least.
Crystal Weber, city recorder. Before that, I was in the private sector, but I'm very happy to be here now.
Perfect. Okay. Well, then without further ado, we'll turn it over to Ashley for our legal issues for the Philomath Planning Commission and City Council and legislative update. Take it away.
Introduce myself so I don't do that. but I am Ashley McGill. I'll be presenting, have an agenda here for you. So these are a kind of high-level overview of the topics that we'll be discussing tonight. First, just a brief refresher for those of you who are fresh, and I heard a few fresh names on the introductions, so this will be a good basics for you all. A brief refresher on land use basics, and then some important issues to keep in mind when you are making land use decisions for the city, and then also some legislative updates from this past year, from legislative session 2025. And one brief reminder on 2024 as well. All right, so Oregon has unique land use laws, unique to the United States, possibly unique to the world, in the way that they structure at least their planning goals. So Oregon has 19 statewide planning goals. These are adopted at a state level. And these goals express the state's policies on land use and related topics like citizen involvement, housing, natural resources, and more. And most goals are accompanied by guidelines, which are suggestions about how a goal may be applied. Those are written in the Oregon Administrative Rules, the OARs. There are also statutes, which are either requirements regarding procedure, requirements about other aspects of state law regarding land use and development. Oregon's statewide goals are achieved through local comprehensive planning. State law requires that each city and county adopt a comprehensive plan, and this is essentially your overarching foundational aspirational document for your city of how you want land use and development to occur within your city. And in addition to the comp plan, you must also adopt the zoning and land division ordinances that are needed to put the plan into effect. So theoretically, every land use development ordinance should point back to your comprehensive plan. It should be your guiding star in everything that you do land use related. Local comprehensive plans must be consistent with the statewide planning goals. So even though they're a guidance document, they also must be looking up to the comprehensive plan, to the statewide planning goals. Plans are reviewed for consistency by the state's Land Conservation and Development Commission, that is LCDC. When LCDC officially approves a local government's plan, the plan is said to be acknowledged. It then becomes the controlling document for land use in the area that's covered by that plan. So at the local level, you have the comp plan, you have the ordinances that implement the comp plan, and then you each play a role in this process. Council acts in a legislative capacity to enact ordinances and adopt and amend the comprehensive plan. I know you're going through you just went through a comprehensive plan amendment a little while ago, and you'll be going through some legislative updates to your city ordinances in the next year or so. And then Planning Commission and Council review development applications for compliance with your city code and with your comp plan. That's a lot, but hopefully that gives a little bit of a background and context. So before we talk about land use decision types, I just want to talk a little bit about what a land use decision is or isn't. And this is fortunately or unfortunately an area where land use lawyers live a lot of the time, is the difference in what it is and isn't. By state law, a land use decision involves a final decision made by a city that concerns adopting, amending, or applying statewide planning goals, a comprehensive plan, or local land use regulations. So to grossly oversimplify that, if it's within your comp plan, if it's within your development code, or if it's within another statewide planning goal state statute, then it is a land use regulation. If it's in your municipal code, it likely is not a land use regulation. And the two main types of land use decisions that the Planning Commission and City Council will be required to act on with any sort of regularity are legislative and quasi-judicial decisions. So I'll go over that in a little bit more detail in just a second. There's also a long list of what isn't a land use decision in state law as well. I won't bore you with all of those, but generally a couple of the more common types of decisions that aren't land use decisions are ministerial decisions or ones that don't require any sort of exercise of policy or judgment, basically just a checking of the box. And also building permits. Those are two fairly common ones that the state just says those aren't land use decisions. All right, so the first type of land use decision, these are legislative decisions. So I hinted at this earlier, but these typically involve the adoption of more generally applicable policies or standards that apply to a variety of factual situations in a broad class of people. So the classic example of these, again, is a amendment to your development code. Anytime you're passing an ordinance, that is a legislative act. So because of that, you all have been elected for your personal opinions, for your beliefs, for your values. And when you are enacting legislation, that is when that piece of your position shines, right? You are meant to bring your own perspective and your own personality into this decision making. And because of this, you're not required to reach a decision, and you can table or extend the conversation for as long as possible. There's no timeline associated with legislative decisions. And also, because it is your personal opinion, bias and ex parte don't apply. So you can say, this is my opinion, this is my perspective, unlike quasi-judicial, which I'll talk about in a moment. So, in contrast to legislative actions, you have quasi-judicial actions. And so this is the area of land use law where you all will be the most often, is you will most often be making quasi-judicial decisions. And the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial is determined with a 3-factor test. This comes from a case from the 70s called Strawberry Hill Four-Wheelers. And yeah, fun name. So these 3 factors look at if the application only involves a single property or a small group of properties, the decision on the application is based on pre-existing criteria, and the city is required to make a decision. And if these 3 factors apply, then it's quasi-judicial. And so there are a number of decisions that are quasi-judicial but may be stated otherwise in code. That's fairly common. A common example of one that crops up in a lot of people's codes is annexations. Many annexations are actually quasi-judicial. It is an application only involving a small group of people, a decision based on pre-existing criteria, and the city's required to make a decision. And yet it's often ranked as a type of legislative. But that's where staff can come in and kind of guide you all on the appropriate process. As I said, most of your decisions are quasi-judicial, and the focus there is on the judicial aspect. You are essentially acting as a judge, a neutral decision maker in this application. And you are reviewing the application based on your code's criteria. And because of that, there are additional requirements that apply to you all when you're acting in that quasi-judicial capacity. Before I talk about those, just a quick note on decision types. So Philomath, like many other communities, further divides land use actions into 4 types, types 1 through 4. I know I just said that ministerial are not land use decisions, and yet in many people's codes, including Philomath's, ministerial decisions are included as type 1. These are permits that are related to land use, but do not necessarily require exercise of policy or judgment. And so it's usually just a staff decision. You either met the criteria or you don't. It's fairly simple. It's just a checking of the box. Types 2 and 3 are technically both quasi-judicial. However, types 2 typically require less policy or judgment, and therefore initially are made by staff, but then upon appeal can be heard by an elected body. Type 3 are simply quasi-judicial, and then type 4 are legislative. Okay, so the first standard that will apply to you all when making quasi-judicial decisions, again, this standard applies in a quasi-judicial context, not when you're making legislative decisions. And that is bias. So there's the common kind of local understanding of bias, and then there's land use legal understanding of bias, and they aren't necessarily the same. In the legal land use understanding of bias, a court will look at all the facts and circumstances surrounding your actions rather than your own personal intent. So when you're thinking about bias for yourself, it's always best to think, what is the public, what is the community seeing when I'm taking certain actions, when I'm talking a certain way, when I'm acting a certain way. Bias exists if a decision was the product of positive or negative bias rather than independent review of the facts and law. And the standard for that is whether a decision maker prejudged an application and did not reach a decision based on the evidence in the record and the applicable criteria. So that is fairly straightforward on its face, but it can become highly fact specific. So I'm going to illustrate it with just a couple examples. This one is a case out of Depot Bay. And in this case, fairly straightforward. Before a decision had been made, a city councilor sent a letter to the mayor and other councilors concluding that the applicant did not have the right to use the structure that they had applied to use for the proposed use. So essentially in this case, this is a straight case of prejudging an application. Before they had held the hearing, before they had reached a final decision, before they had heard all the facts and evidence in that public hearing, they had already formed their conclusion. They had already contacted the mayor and other council members saying, basically, I don't even need to go through the public process. I already have my mind made up. And because they sent this letter, that was clear evidence of prejudging the application to the Land Use Board of Appeals. Another example, and this is another way to prove bias, which is called animus. That's basically ill intent. So in this fun case out of Cottage Grove, a city councilor had signed a letter to the local newspaper editor encouraging project opponents to leave town. They also requested police logs regarding project's opponents and included them in the record. So even though they didn't state their personal opinion about this application, they didn't say you should deny or approve, unlike the prior decision, there was a clear level of animus here that Land Use Board of Appeals found. So they concluded that the counselor was biased here. Those are two extreme examples. So here we have on the flip side some examples of where bias was not found. First is in the city of Jacksonville. In this case, city councilor was a member of a church that applied for a conditional use permit, and they participated in the process and they voted to approve the permit. And this decision was appealed to LUBA, and LUBA said that where the decision maker had expressed concern about the proposed conditions of approval, but declared on the record that she was able to render a decision based on the facts and law before her, that decision maker had not impermissibly judged the application. So from this case, what you can take away, and what's really important, is if you have somewhat of an appearance of bias, and there's potentially a question, should I participate, should I not, but you feel strongly like you want to continue to participate and you feel that you are not biased, because it is a self-assessment, if you should at least state what the appearance of bias is potentially, and then state that you nevertheless feel that you can reach an impartial decision based on the facts and evidence. And this case shows that that will count towards LUBA potentially considering you not to be biased.
Actually, I just have a quick clarifying question. What is LUBA?
Oh, I apologize. The Land Use Board of Appeals. Okay. There's a lot of acronyms. Please ask questions if you have any.
And that's so like if someone disagrees with what the planning commission does, they can appeal it to the city council. And then if they disagree with what the city council does.
That's exactly right. So that's another unique thing about Oregon is we have an appellate court that is only for land use. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but after a final local decision has been made, typically by the city council, then interested parties have the ability to appeal locally within Oregon. The first stop is the Land Use Board of Appeals, or LUBA, and they're a 3-panel judge, or board, I guess, and they will hear these local appeals. Then from LUBA, you can appeal to the Oregon Court of Appeals, and then from the Oregon Court of Appeals, you can appeal to the Oregon Supreme Court. All right, and then the final example. In this case, and this is just a one. Petitioner challenged a city decision to approve a plan amendment, zone change, and master plan. And in this case, there was a comment by a city councilor that was part of a larger conversation where the councilor expressed his frustration regarding the land use process. And he referred to the land use process with an acronym BANANA, which means build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And so with this acronym, someone appealed claiming that he was biased and that this showed his bias against the particular application. But the court said, no, just that one comment alone is not sufficient to show that you're biased. You're simply expressing your frustration with the land use process as a whole, not with this particular application. Maybe the comments were potentially misplaced at this particular time, but that standing alone is not sufficient. And that just shows, again, that the Land Use Board of Appeals will look at all the evidence together in the record rather than just one particular instance of expressing your frustration. All right. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So I assume, well, I don't want to assume, which is why I'm asking, when they look at these bias cases, like probably what happened is they said, somebody thought they might have been, but the evidence and their vote all sort of pointed to the fact that they used the evidence to vote accordingly, right? So the opposite of this would be like if despite all the evidence that somebody had met the criteria or whatever, and then I was like, nah, and then I voted no, even though there was like ample evidence, or is that kind of what they're doing? I know it's not like that cut and dry, but is that what they're kind of trying to do to decide bias?
That could be something that would spur someone to bring a claim. Often if you have voted counter to interested parties' interests, right, then they might end up appealing. But I think it's often more than just what you do at the hearing. It's often your surrounding circumstances. Maybe you are personal friends with the applicant. Maybe there's evidence of you going to house parties, dinner parties with him every month. Maybe you run into him at the grocery store and you have thought about going into business together. Maybe your children grew up together. It's lots of, in small communities, that can be fairly common. So there are many facts and circumstances that might not rise to the full level of bias, but might give an appearance of bias. And it's that gray area, those questionable ones where, again, you have to look at what would the public think if they knew these facts from the outside looking in. Maybe I always say err on the side of over-disclosure. So if you think that there's a question that possibly someone might think your impartiality is in question, then disclose it and then say that you can nevertheless reach an impartial decision.
And so to evaluate that at LUBA or wherever else, then they would just sort of look at the vote and and the evidence?
They would just look at everything, all the facts and circumstances in the record, maybe any comments that you made before the final decision was made, right? Did you prejudge? Was there any animus? Was there any evidence that you had ill intent against the applicant, or the other side? Was there any other evidence of some sort of collusion with any of the particular parties? All these different facts and circumstances that surround the decision-making process.
To clarify though, it's only what gets brought up in the actual planning commission meetings though, right? Like that's the only
Correct.
evidence that gets
Correct.
taken and discussed.
That is exactly right. And also the interested party has to state that they want to appeal on that basis at the hearing, right? You have to state your intent to appeal at that hearing or your objection. Yes.
Can't bring new evidence later, correct?
After the local process is done, evidence, no new arguments. Yeah. So yeah, you have to have made that argument there and the evidence has to be put into the record there. So they would have to say, you've been, your kids have grown up together and, I feel that you're biased. But sometimes it's still good to proactively disclose something, right? If there's been maybe rumors around or you've been hearing, rumblings, or you just know that you're personally involved somehow, then again, it's just better to over disclose.
So the only time you should excuse yourself is when you feel you can't make an impartial decision.
Correct. Or I guess I should say, if you feel that you can't make an impartial decision, or you feel that it looks really bad, right? Because again, it is all about the facts and circumstances of a particular, like, you know, a member of the public from the outside looking in, right? Because a lot of the time, you won't feel impartial, but potentially from a layman's perspective, looking in at the decision you're making, it could appear that you were biased.
Not side route, but I'm gonna ask you two questions, put you on the spot. So let's say you're on the planning commission and you've heard rumors about another planning commissioner that's maybe putting some stuff out on social media or talking to other people, and you just hear it, but you don't get it yourself. Now you come to a planning commission meeting, you got a public hearing, and they ask, are there any biases, any ex parte contacts? And you're looking at the individual waiting for them to raise their hand, and they don't raise their hand.
Well, we hope no one says anything. I mean, typically in that circumstance, I would hope that you would come to your city manager or your city attorney before the hearing. A lot of those things can be worked out before the hearing even happens. And in a situation like that, that happens, I would say, fairly often. Especially for me in my role, you know, I'll hear from a city manager or from a mayor or someone else, you know, I have a concern, so-and-so may have an appearance of bias, and then I'll have a conversation with them, let them know, you know, oftentimes it's just an educational opportunity, right? Because again, it's not necessarily that you can't make an impartial decision, it's that appearance issue, right? So then I'll have a conversation, we'll meet together about, you know, here's a script of what you can say at the hearing if you want to continue to participate. Otherwise, you know, if you feel like this is too much of an issue, then, you know, here's how you recuse yourself.
Okay, second question. You're at the city council level, and put the council on the spot, so you're picked on the planning commission. You're at the city council level, nobody claims any bias, ex parte contacts, everything's good, but somebody from the audience testifies during testimony, and they accuse one of the council members of having a bias. Decision is made, say it's unanimous, 7-0, passes, everybody's happy, but then an appeal is filed to the Land Use Board of Appeals claiming bias that they stated, and so they want to appeal a decision. If the Land Use Board of Appeals doesn't agree with them and says there was no bias, it stands. What if they agree that there was bias on the part of the city council? What happens to the decision?
That decision, you said it was unanimous?
Sure.
If it was unanimous, that would be an interesting question. Usually it can be invalidated. The result of bias can be an invalidation of a final decision. It's a very interesting question of, if it's a unanimous vote, what does one extra vote do? I would have to look into that and get back to you.
We let the Land Use Board of Appeals decide at that point, right?
Yeah. It's a little different concept, but isn't it sort of like harmless error?
Oh, it is. No, that's exactly what I was thinking of. But I don't want to tell you for sure until I researched it, because I haven't researched that particular scenario.
I remember that Jacksonville case for me. It came up, it was relevant to something that was in my office, and it went up to Lou in the Court of Appeals twice.
Yeah, and a lot of those do.
And the second time, the commissioner or the councilor, whoever it was, said the magic words, and so it was okay.
Yeah, no, and a lot of the time it is, right? And that's
Yeah.
why, you know, it's better to just have a conversation. Either just disclose it and say those magic words, and then oftentimes that is sufficient for real. So it's always better to, in most public contexts, to just err on the side of over-disclosure. But that is a really good question. Harmless error is the common defense to procedural issues. So I'll look into that and get back to you.
And what happens to the council then?
What happens to them?
Recall election.
Yeah.
Stocks.
Yeah, I mean, understanding if the vote's then overturned, or, I mean, it seems like it's very particular to each scenario, but I mean, what are the consequences of some of these examples? You know?
So for bias and ex parte, which I'm about to talk about, the consequences are for the city.
Mhm.
So even though it's a personal assessment, it can have large impacts. The one I will talk about later, which is conflicts of interest and then a few other ethics issues, those are personal liability. So for those, if you violate those, you can be fined. or there can be other public reprimand issues with OGEC. But as far as, city consequences for elected officials, usually there's not much that a city can do. I mean, sometimes some charters have public reprimand processes, but that's fairly uncommon. And I mean, really, it's up to the people who elected you all if, they want to do something.
We're not elected officials.
Correct, that's true, appointed officials, that's correct. So it would just be whatever was in your, whatever was in your code.
A counseling session.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a training video with.
Had like, the council remove planning commissioner? They are going off the rails.
So, yeah.
Right, yeah.
It's taking a turn.
I shot it, but
Yeah.
Council invited you on.
Quite uncomfortable with this conversation.
Not to go big brother, but again, just generally speaking, especially for Philomath specifically, if there's a question of bias, we're gonna talk about ex parte contacts here in a second. Come and talk to me about it, right? Let me be your first line of defense. I will talk you through it. If it's not obvious to me, then we'll get on the phone with Ashley and we'll make that call. But don't contact Ashley directly. Come and talk to me. Let's see how cut and dry it is. I'll advise you. If you're not happy with that, again, we can move on, talk to Ashley and get a legal opinion on that. So where those affect the city, come talk to me. And usually 9 times out of 10, we can resolve pretty quick because I'll give you the magic words, right? I'll tell you what to say before the meeting when the chair asks you, are there any bias, conflict of interest? If you state this, then you're fine.
Yeah.
If you state this and if you don't feel like you are and you want to recuse yourself, here's what you say and no harm done, right? It's like, yeah, I'm too close to this. I'm biased. There's a perception of bias. I'm gonna not participate in the proceedings. And that's fine. You get to go home for the night. Everybody else has to sit there and have the meeting. So anyway.
But yes, it's always better to ask, right? Ask Chris, ask me, we can 9 times out of 10, like Chris said, help you out. And I'm going to also talk about the ones that have personal liability. There's also a free resource, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. You can always contact them for free, and I have their contact info in here, and they will give you interpretations. You can also get a formal opinion from them, and you're allowed to rely on those opinions. So it's a great free resource for elected and appointed officials. All right, so moving on to ex parte contacts. So these are any communication or information that is received outside of the record on a matter that is pending before the city. And just as a reminder, ex parte, just like bias, this just applies to quasi-judicial. So both of these are only in that context. So this is very broad. This is really anything that you receive outside the record. That can be even site visits, that can be emails that you didn't solicit, an email that is sent to every planning commissioner stating a particular opinion. It can be you run into somebody at the grocery store and they start asking you about an upcoming hearing, and even if you say, I'm sorry, I can't talk, they've still said something to you. And so it's been a one-way communication, but it's still been an ex parte contact. So in a small town, this happens, right? It's very common to have ex parte contacts, and that's fine. You just have to say what was said. So at the public hearing, when you're prompted by staff, you have to mention that it occurred, and you have to mention the substance. You can't just say that it happened. You have to say generally a summary of what was said. And as long as you do those 2 things, then you're fine. Go ahead.
So as long as you disclose the substance, you're fine. You can proceed. Like then it's like bias disappears then?
Bias, it still is in play, right? This is only to satisfy ex parte contacts requirement.
Okay.
So multiple ex parte contacts can give an appearance of bias, right? What if your ex parte contacts were multiple site visits where you had meetings with the applicant? That can look like you're potentially giving views to one side or the other, right? Or if you're having multiple email exchanges with the applicant, right? Or they're sending you special materials that they aren't sending to everyone else.
Is a site visit something formal, or is, just no driving
by the site, checking it out.
And I feel like that's an example of like where you could have an ex parte contact that's not biased. Like,
Yep.
I went and looked at the empty lot and then I came to the meeting. Like, you have no bias because of
Yeah.
that.
That's a great example. Yeah, another ex parte contact where there wouldn't be bias would be, I received an email from the applicant, I didn't open it. That's very common, right?
She didn't open it?
It's your choice. If you didn't open it, then you didn't read it and there's no substance to disclose, right? But so I guess I just say again, with this, err on the side of over-disclosure. If you have a particular problem application, I encourage appointed and elected officials to just keep a Word doc where you list your contacts, and that way you don't have to remember them all. Write them down, you can write a little summary, and you can even turn that in to Chris and just say, here are the 20 ex parte contacts I had over the last couple of months. Here's my summary already written out. Worst case scenario, that won't necessarily happen, but just as an example.
Do you have to read those out loud at the hearing?
If you've had multiple serial communications like that, you don't necessarily. We can just say, I have had multiple ex parte contacts with a particular individual. They run solicited. They're all listed in Exhibit A. That's why we would do it that way. And then there are exceptions, communications with staff and communications before an application is submitted and after a final decision. But the entire time between when the application is submitted and when the final decision is made, that is ex parte contact territory. All right, moving on. Conflicts of interest. So conflicts of interest apply anytime you're meeting. It doesn't just have to be prosecutable. This also applies to city council. I think I spoke about this with the law. And you have two types of conflicts of interest. You have actual and potential. So actual conflicts are where a decision that you are making will result in a private financial benefit or detriment to you, your relative, or a business with which you are associated. And so all of those have very specific legal definitions, relative and business do, at least. A potential conflict is where a decision may result in a private financial benefit or detriment. So if it's an actual, it will financially affect you or your business. If it's potential, it may affect you, your relative, or your business. An example of a potential conflict in a land use context, let's say your spouse is a real estate agent and there is a subdivision a subdivision application that's coming before you all. And they are a real estate agent for Philomath and Corvallis generally. They practice in this area. If the land use decision is approved, they may get some additional business. If it's denied, they may not. They may get some less business. That is an example of a potential conflict because they're your spouse and they could have a financial benefit or detriment from this decision. So in that case, it would be potential. An actual would be, you are in business with the applicant. You are related to the applicant, etc. So what do you have to do for each of these? In both cases, you have to disclose. So in the public meeting, before you participate in the meeting, you must state to the public the conflict. And then for an actual conflict, you must recuse yourself. So if it's a potential, you can continue to participate after you've disclosed. Of course, you can always choose to remove yourself if you want to. But for an actual conflict, you have to recuse yourself. And as a best practice, we just recommend leaving the room entirely, just to avoid any sort of appearance of influencing the process. But that is ultimately your choice. And as you can imagine, it has overlap with bias as well. There may be situations where maybe you have a potential conflict, or technically it doesn't even meet the definition of either, but you still, to the outside world, maybe you have this appearance of bias, just because of this particular relationship. And then for this one, as I mentioned before, this is personal liability. And if you have questions, you can always contact OGEC. And I have their contact at the end of the presentation. All right, go ahead.
One question. So if we know that there's a conflict of interest, we want to recuse, is the procedure to come to the meeting, formally recuse, and then leave? Or would it be preferable just not to show up at the call and give you the reason? Like, what's the procedure there that the city recommends?
I would say I prefer that you, if you don't show up at all, it may just be like, you know, you're declared absent in your stead, or, you know, maybe you're excused or something. So I think it's better to show up, even if it's just virtual, and then recuse yourself there at the beginning when they give you the option. It is a little bit extra out of your way to do that, but it is a best practice.
Yeah.
Easier on staff.
Awesome, thank you.
I had members write a letter as well that they give to me or to the chair, and we'll have the chair state at the time, they may have any ex parte contact or conflicts of interest. And then the chair will just read, say, we got a statement from Commissioner Cup stating they have a conflict of interest, or we read your 1 or 2 sentences into the record and then done. So, you know, we can save you having to actually be at the meeting, but we'll still take the time to enter your conflict of interest into the record, note that you're not there. We do that. That saves you having to, you know, get all dressed up, come to a meeting and go.
Yeah, that would work really well as well.
Thank you.
All right. And then just really quickly, some other government ethics issues that you all may come across. You may not use your position or office to attempt to obtain financial gain or avoid financial detriment. Recently, OGEC has been interpreting this one pretty broadly. We will see how that plays out in the near future. We also have, well, there was a recent OGEC opinion on food and beverages being a violation of this statute, actually. So
if anyone asks, this food and beverage is available to any member of the public that came to the meeting tonight.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say you bought it.
I did not.
because
It's true, it's true. If anyone's welcome to come in the store and go get a slice of cold pizza. Or warm salad, no choice.
call you out.
That's okay.
So then another common one is gifts. And so this is just anything of economic value that's not offered to the general public. And the threshold for this is $50, which may seem, I mean, nowadays maybe not quite so much, but it's actually $50 over an entire calendar year. So the example I give for that is drinks. If someone has a legislative or administrative interest in you, maybe you go out monthly just as you get coffee or a beer with them after work on a monthly basis, and you trade off buying the coffee or buying the beer. And one time that is okay, but over the course of a year, that will definitely exceed $50. So better to just buy for yourself.
Depending on what you're drinking.
Yeah.
Okay, and that one's also, these are both personal liability as well, so you can also contact OGEC to discuss these.
So they get someone, it's hypothetical, but like someone gave you a gift on December 31st and gave you a gift on January 1st.
That would be acceptable, like you receive any other gifts.
Right, well, I'm not sure if it was like if someone gave me a gift on July 4th, they couldn't give me another gift until next July 4th. I'm just, you know, keep it in mind, everyone.
Large questions in the statute.
Right.
So again, if you have specific questions, it's always good to ask OGEC. These two in particular, I can't advise you on because again, it's personal liability. So I have the city's attorney. So again, if you have questions, OGEC is a great resource. Or when I'm giving a presentation like this, of course.
And I'll advise you to go to OGEC. Come on in and ask me. They're nice because they will look at your specific example, right? Like she said, they will look at your facts, it's not generally speaking, right? They'll look at your situation, they'll give you guidance in writing that you can rely on, right? And if something ever gets called in question, you go back and say, I took this to government's, the Ethics Commission, and they gave me an opinion stating X, and that will give you coverage. So it's a good resource and it's free, so.
All right, public meetings issues. So Planning Commission and City Council are both subject to Oregon public meetings laws.
I just want to make, so for the like gifts piece, I know it says include relatives, household, but it doesn't include your relatives given.
No, this
If someone
law-
gave your relative a gift,
Correct.
but like if my mom gave me a birthday present, that's allowed,
Not
right?
unless they have a legislative or administrative interest in it.
She does live here. Okay.
So, I mean, it's.
One more page.
Next year, probably, yeah. Think of a birthday present this year.
It's gifts that are given from people with a legislative or administrative interest in you that they give to your mom. Right?
Gotcha.
Okay.
Developed by your mom a new car. Mom, some guy dropped it off.
Exactly.
We got it, well. It's funny because it happens, right? I mean, that's what's funny is.
Read some of those OGEC opinions if you're interested in some of the all right, so all meetings must be publicly noticed and open to the public. So any meeting that you all participate in have to follow these state law requirements. And this applies to meetings where decisions or deliberations on matters of official business occur with a quorum of you. And a quorum is typically a majority of your councilors or commissioners. So this also includes electronic communication. So if a quorum of you all communicate over email, for example, over text, over message on a social media platform, all of those things could be considered a public meeting and would have to follow these requirements or else would be in violation of public meetings law. It also applies to serial meetings, which are meetings that happen non-contemporaneously. They don't occur in the same time or in the same place. So an example of, again, the email chain, or another common example is through an intermediary. So that is where you tell your city manager to tell a different council member a certain material, and then that is conveyed to a quorum of your council or of your planning commission. That can inadvertently also create a serial meeting. So generally, recommend avoid reply all emails. I also recommend avoiding telling Chris to tell another council member or another planning commissioner a certain thing. Wait to have those conversations in a public meeting. Of course, you can communicate non-deliberation specific material to Chris or to another staff member, such as scheduling, asking to introduce certain topics at a meeting, etc.
So Ashley, I'd like to spend at least a couple minutes talking about this because last year, maybe even further back than that, we've been working on updating our the planning code for a long time, and we had kind of bounced around the idea of having like working sessions where we didn't necessarily have to have a full-blown agenda. We all come here and we're discussing everything line by line, but more like we have an electronic document that we're all kind of contributing to and working to. And then the idea was like the result of that we would come and discuss at our monthly meeting to go over what all the changes were, so that part is public.
So you would work on it behind the scenes together.
But the results of that would be in the open public forum.
That would arguably be deliberating, I would say, because you're communicating about a draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could each come up with your own review of the code individually, and then you could bring that together at the public meeting, at that work session, right? It could be outside of your regularly scheduled meetings as long as it was noticed and it was in a public setting and it followed the other public meetings laws. But no, I would not suggest that you contribute to a shared document together. I think that could definitely be considered a form of
Okay. So when you say notice, is that defined by our code or ORS?
both, I believe.
Okay.
So there's different requirements depending on the type of meeting. Special meetings, I believe, are 48 hours in advance. And emergency meetings are 24 hours in advance.
Those kinds of meetings where we're just working on the code, I don't think we even noticed those. Maybe they show up in the newsletter, but they're just our.
We're doing a work session. It gets noticed like all of our other.
Yeah, your staff.
It's not like posted. There's no signs going up or anything.
They just need to be on your website. It doesn't need a lot. It can just be and there's specific requirements typically in your code about what is sufficient notice.
There's no getting around it. Like it's just the process that we've had to go through to update this code. Just it seems so laborious because there's all this red tape around what we can and can't do, and there's no. Yeah, this sounds like what you're saying. There's no way around it.
Yeah, there's nothing about public meetings issues that deals with efficiency.
Yeah, I get that, but I still.
Well, I mean, this is all from the legislature, but of course, it's fine for the legislature to all go in a little room and shut the door.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as we don't do it. So.
Take your direction at a public meeting, take it away, produce a draft, come back to you at another public meeting to consider the draft, right? Because they can act on their own subject to.
But if I show up with my own draft and submit it to the city in that meeting, that'll work?
That's fine. Yeah, you just can't discuss it with any of your other planning commission members side of the.
I want to ask that question, because that was one area that I was wanting to understand. We talked about when the meeting was in a quorum, it's a public meeting. Two commissioners talking over coffee is not a public meeting.
Correct.
But if we discussed in this case, our zoning code, that would be allowed or not allowed?
It would be allowed because it's not a quorum, but I would still suggest caution because what if you have this conversation and then you casually mention it to a third commissioner? And then a fourth commissioner, right? It's easy to not keep it just between you two, right? And it's easy to forget, you've just had this conversation between you two and not casually mention it to another one.
In California, there's a thing called the Brown Act, which basically says that's illegal and you can be held liable. So Oregon doesn't have any specific law like that, but you're recommending that we stay away from that.
From having a conversation just between two commissioners?
Yes, on a particular subject that's at some points before the council.
It's generally a good idea,
right.
Best practice to not do that.
Okay, it's best
right?
practice in Oregon.
But no, it's not illegal. A quorum is required.
California.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Oregon, to create a public meeting, you have to have a quorum.
So, because I know, I'm trying to make sure I phrase this right. I know what you're saying, like, you want to avoid accidentally creating a serial meeting, but like, is it Is it okay for one person, like if every counselor tells Chris how they feel about something, but Chris doesn't tell any other counselor how any other counselor feels about it, then obviously Chris knows what the vote's going to be, but the council, there's not a quorum of the council at any time that knows what the vote's going to be. Is that okay?
So cities do, especially if city manager to do.
Right.
It is not okay if a council member does that. So
okay.
Often your city manager will do this, but in plenty of other cities, the mayor will do this.
Right.
That can create, only as of last week,
Oh.
According to OGEC, because again, they're expanding their interpretations of a lot of these ethics rules. They have just recently said, and they haven't come out with a final decision yet, but they are leaning towards saying if a elected or appointed official does that, then that could still create a meeting.
I hate these people.
As city councilors, we go to community events. And if we just so happen to have 4 people there, we split up. We don't even stand near each other, even if we're not even talking about anything other than the food at the party or whatever it is. But we don't want any appearance of that, so.
That's a great question and something that happens a lot. As you are completely encouraged to attend those sorts of events, public events, social gatherings, and you can attend with your full commission and full council, but you just cannot discuss city business. So as long as you are just keeping your conversation light and nothing to do with the topics that will come before you at council, then it's completely fine. It's just once you start talking about things that you'll be deliberating on, and you definitely can't reach any final decision.
And sometimes we will still, like if we're all going to go to the same presentation or something, it might still.
Depends on what it is. If we
Yeah.
know it's going to be a topic, for example, if everybody was going to go to a town hall in Corvallis because they were talking about a future agreement with the city or something, and we knew all the council was going to be there, we would probably still notice that to the public that a majority of the council was going to be there. There isn't an agenda topic for the city, but we would probably still just be cautious, disclose that, because you're going to be there gathering information. Who knows when it gets brave, raise your hand, provides a comment with the other 3 or 4 sitting there. So, you know, most of the time in that case, we're going to try to keep it to under 4. But if the abundance, the majority want to go, then out of a preponderance of caution, we'll go ahead and notice those sometimes.
Yeah.
There's other times where it's really tough to notice it. And I've heard examples. I don't want to, again, side rail this too much, but you know, it's not uncommon for councils to carpool, go into conferences. Well, you get 4 people in a carpool, all talking about what they're going to be talking about and how it relates to what's happening in town. You're having a meeting, you know, and so you really do have to be careful, right? Because you're going to get into that. Well, it's not going to happen then. It's going to happen 2 months later when you're sitting in a council meeting. Like, oh yeah, when we were driving to the council, remember we talked about, and the community's going to go, what?
Yeah.
Where were we? Where we weren't invited? Where was the press?
And that's exactly how it happens, right? It's at a public meeting where you say, oh, remember that time? And then, you know, you have somebody who's observing and they can now file their own complaints proactively. And so.
Or the mayor says, I've talked to you all about this and I know this is where we're headed. So we're just going to press the chase. You were going to make the motion, right? You were going to second it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, no, bad, right? Public meeting, public conversation. You know, public decision in public.
Yes.
But just to that, aren't there some exceptions for those, like training conferences or something?
Yeah. Again, you can attend trainings, you can attend social events. Again, you just can't talk about business. You can communicate to staff. You can communicate for scheduling, right? You know, you have to have the full council or the full planning commission communicate to get proper scheduling. But that's not considered deliberations or a quorum. So yeah, there are exceptions.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to hearing requirements. So these are requirements that are specific to quasi-judicial hearings, not just to generally public meetings, right? So all the public meeting requirements also apply to a hearing, but these are specific additional requirements. A lot of these will be handled by staff. So there are additional notice requirements, but again, that's something that staff will handle. It's notice that goes out in advance of a hearing to certain people within a radius of the site in question. Staff typically provides a script to open the hearing, which meets other requirements that are set out in state law. And there are additional requirements, even more, around what's referred to as the initial evidentiary hearing. That's just the first hearing that you hold at a local level. At that hearing, anyone can ask for time to present additional argument or evidence. If they ask for that before you close the hearing, then the record has to be held open or you have to grant a continuance. So that just gives people more time to present additional argument or evidence. And the applicant always gets the last word, so they get an additional 7 days after the record closes to submit final written argument unless it's given. So presiding officer has inherent authority to report. There are reasonable rules for conduct of a meeting. The order and length of public testimony has to be specified. It's not required to be, but I recommend that you specify that. And that you limit it into a certain time period for testimony. For disturbances, this is a bit higher of a bar than it is for public meetings in general. You know, typically the First Amendment is very broad, and so we highly discourage any sort of restriction on freedom of speech at a public meeting. Especially in Oregon, it's even stronger First Amendment than it is on a federal level. But for land use, because it is a quasi-judicial process, you have a bit more ability to restrict individuals' ability to speak in that context. So initially, we recommend providing a warning. If the behavior continues, you can ask them to leave the meeting. If they do not leave, then they can be treated as a trespasser. And rather than going through that, you can also just call a recess and then attempt to deal with the disruptive individual during that recess rather than causing a scene. And that's in the discretion of the hearing presiding officer.
Well, maybe you just answered that. I guess I was just, can you elaborate a little bit on what a disturbance would be? I remember from this from like an LOC conference where they were like, if someone is sitting in the back of the room giving a Nazi salute, that's not a disturbance.
That is correct in a public meeting context.
Okay, but for a hearing,
in a public meeting context where the First Amendment is so strong, it would take actual immediate threat of physical harm or a disturbance where you cannot continue the meeting. In a hearings context, it's a little lower, right? Sure. Maybe I had a recent hearing where two members of the public, one opposed to the application, one for the application, were sitting on opposite sides of the room and started arguing with each other in the back of the room in raised elevation. And the mayor, commented a couple of times, and in their discretion, he didn't want to necessarily eject those two individuals from the process, but just commented a few times, fellows, we can't have that in this hearing. It's a hearing, we have to maintain decorum, et cetera. And they calmed down. But if that had escalated, that would be an example.
Okay. Do you want to do that on the record instead of during a recess?
Yeah. I mean, it's better to, but what I'm imagining more for a recess is, for example, if, you need to trespass the individual, meaning like a police officer has to remove the individual. You don't necessarily want to do that during the public meeting.
You lost a chance.
But the situation I just described, which is much more common, right? The trespass is far less common. But, where there's just a minor disturbance and then the presiding officer just, mentions it, continues, then yes, that should definitely be during the hearing. You don't need to call a recess of it.
Just gets amped up, right? And just, hey,
Cool
we're
it
gonna
down.
stop you there, we're gonna take a recess, take a little break and, let them gather themselves, commission, council gather themselves. And when you come back, usually temperatures are down a little bit more. So it's just getting a breather.
People can get surprisingly heated over land use, as I'm sure you all are aware.
Yeah, and I'll say that was something that was meant to me when I first became mayor, of like, just remember that you can take a recess. Because I think sometimes you get in those situations like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? And if you're trying to figure out what to do, then the answer is just like, take a little recess and then figure out what to do. Instead of like trying to make it up on the spot while everything's happening.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Just as long as you don't accidentally deliberate during that recess.
That's right.
All right. So
city recorder will jump in. Hey.
Like you could go to a recess and then like the mayor and the city manager could like decide if they want to trespass someone.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or just let everyone cool off.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Go get a drink of water, walk around the building, come back.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So the city is responsible for ensuring all evidence and testimony becomes part of the record for a decision. This is especially important if a decision is appealed, because your record is basically what you formed at the local level if you appeal to any of the state courts. If new evidence is introduced at a hearing, it may be in everyone's best interest to continue that hearing and allow interested parties time to review. So everything procedural at a local level is about giving people time to review things and time to respond. So if there's new evidence or testimony, that can be in everyone's best interests. Decision maker's final decision must be based on substantial evidence in the record. That's a legal standard. For quasi-judicial decisions, evidence that does not speak to one of the relevant criteria must be disregarded. So again, this is fairly common where you'll hear a quasi-judicial application and you'll have many interested parties come in and speak to, very valid concerns about, issues in their neighborhood that they may be seeing from the result of that development. Maybe they're concerned of noise, maybe they're concerned of, impacts to their community in one way or another. But none of those things, unfortunately, are criteria in your code. And so in a quasi-judicial context, you can only consider the criteria in your code and the evidence that applies to those criteria. In a similar vein, if there is conflicting evidence, there's multiple pieces of testimony that have been provided speaking for and against a particular criteria, we also should discuss that and dispose of it in our final decision. So staff should weigh those criteria, council and plan commission should weigh those criteria and ultimately decide which one is more persuasive. All right, criterion findings, criteria. So as I said, approval or denial must be based on standards and criteria adopted by ordinance. Decision must be accompanied by a statement explaining the relevant criteria, facts relied upon, and justification for the decision based on the criteria. And then a quick comment on appeals. I kind of already went over this, so I'll just say briefly, there's a local appeals process and that's stated in the code. There's further appeals at the state level following the final local decision. And then just a quick comment on remand. If a decision is appealed to the Land Use Court of Appeals, or Oregon Supreme Court, those bodies will make one of three decisions. They will either affirm your decision, which means that they agree with you. They will reverse your decision, which means that they disagree with you, or they will remand your decision, which means that there is room for further actions on your part. So perhaps they need you to make further findings or connect the dots more with that substantial evidence to support your final decision. Often when a decision is remanded, it will be on only one specific aspect of the decision, right? So often attorneys will structure their argument in multiple facets, right? And maybe you will be affirmed on counts 1 through 5, but remanded on count 6. And so if a remand comes back to you, you will be making a decision on a limited aspect of the original decision. What's interesting is ex parte, bias, conflicts all start back up again on remand. So because of that, if something does get appealed, just keep that in the back of your mind as that proceeds.
I have a quick question on this. Well, hopefully quick. Probably to Chris, but since we're all in the same room, in the last few years, how many appeals has the city seen for like a land use decision? Or along the same vein, how many recommendations from the planning commission have been set aside or by the council?
We had an appeal from a property up on North 12th Street not too long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, that went to the planning commission, where at the staff level, we'd wanted them to do some pavement along the front of the driveway, and they interpret that differently, driveway from roadway, and so that came to the planning commission. They reversed staff's decision on that portion of it, right? The rest of it all stood, kind of Cassidy was saying. Everything else was good. It was just the portion, one of the conditions of approval about improving the street in front of the home. But going from planning commission to city council, I mean, I can't think of one. There were a few.
I think the Letman project was the last one.
Which one?
The Letman project.
Yeah. Yeah, Letman was denied by the planning commission and appealed to the city council and approved by the city council for the self-storage. RV park combo area.
Those before my time then.
I'll also just,
Very often.
I'll say that often, this isn't always true, but often smaller communities have less big interest, right? Big meaning large developers, large stakeholders, right? But as you grow, that changes. And so I personally see not past trends don't necessarily mean future trends.
Sure, yeah.
Public services, lawyers, issues.
I just want to kind of feel out where we're at, you know, I mean, we're not, nothing from the city council's going to Luba, or hasn't.
I mean, we've had challenges to like annexations, but we're talking 8+ years ago. So, I mean, it's not that it doesn't happen, we just don't get a lot of them.
When I was involved for the 14 years I was involved, I think we had 2 or 3 that somebody appealed to but there was only one that they asked for more information, kind of the third thing, and we sent it back and then they approved it, so. I mean, that was for a span of 14 years. Sure.
I'll also note, unfortunately, though, like again, even in this context, past trends don't always necessarily inform future trends because even land use laws were similar for the last decade, and then in the last 2 or 3 years they've exponentially revised the land use framework in Oregon, right? So I think in reacting to that, I think there is going to be a lot of just in that potential lack of clarity in state law. Whenever there's lack of clarity, there's always room to argue over what it means.
Is there like a deadline to make the appeal? Because I'm just, especially with your piece about remand.
Next slide.
Oh, well, but okay, I guess, because that one looked like it was a deadline to make the decision.
Yes, so same deadline applies on the appeal.
Oh, so, okay.
So the initial decision must be made and remand must also be made in 100 days from the date that it's deemed officially accepted.
So like,
I think you're asking to file an appeal of a decision.
like if you wanted to, yeah. Because I was just looking at your thing about remand where it's like, consider implications for bias and ex parte contact. So like, I guess my concern is like, if Van has a development and, right, and like we deny it, and then, 2 years later, Van and I are going out for coffee and talking about, oh, I wish, and then surprise, the Oregon Supreme Court reversed the decision, I was like, oh shoot, well, I've been going out for coffee with Van for the last 2 years, kind of, like, is there like a deadline?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Three weeks if there's no, and again, you'll get a warning that someone is thinking about appealing, right? Because you have to make your arguments at a local level, at least with sufficient specificity for us to understand what you may be appealing on, right? So people will have already generally stated their concerns and potentially their bases of appeal at your hearings.
Okay.
And then from that final decision, they have 21 days to appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals.
Okay, cool. So after that 21 days, if nothing's been filed, then, okay, cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
So sometimes the planning commission isn't like really in the loop for a lot of this stuff. Does the city have kind of a process? Chris, is it gonna be like kind of at our, notes at the end of like, if there was an appeal, the planning commission would be made aware of that, or?
So if it is an appeal, when it comes to you, it'll be part of the staff write-up. We'll say like, here's what decision was made, this is the appeal that got filed and when it was received. So we'll have those timeframes in there. If it's a decision the planning commission makes, then at the end of the script, we always have the line about, this is a decision, it's on to the city council for a final decision, or the city council level, this is a final decision, all appeals have to be made within 21 days. Blah, blah. So we always state that in the hearing. It's up to the people that have stated, those who testified or submitted comments, it's up to them to know their rights, right?
But sometimes we don't hear from.
Right, like you're saying.
For 21 days until
right,
like your packet for next month's meeting, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, if it's an appeal, we'll let you know.
Okay.
We'll let you know we've got an application in, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And there's a cost associated with appealing, right? It's not a free appeal. They have to pay for that appeal. So there's a cost associated to them for that. So it's not on a whim that
Yeah.
somebody's going to appeal. Typically, they've got standing and there is going to be some stuff of substantial gain or loss for them.
No.
If they're willing to put some money down on the appeal.
Right. So, 120-day rule. This is again, final decisions of the application to be complete. And that can be extended. As a practice tip, it's good if you feel like you're coming up against that deadline for staff to bring blank extension forms to a hearing, or just have the applicant agree to extend that timeline in writing at the hearing. You don't know how many times you leave a hearing, you realize you just forgot to ask the applicant for the extension, then they've left on vacation, and you're going to miss that 120-day period. And so it's a fairly simple thing to do, but the consequences for missing it can be fairly severe for the city. All right, and then you have fixed goalpost rule. This is just a rule that says that a decision must be based on the standards and criteria that were applicable when the application was first submitted. So that means that when you first submit the application, even if code or statute changes within the time that it takes for review, you still have to apply those original code and criteria that were around at the initial application. There's new state law that says the applicant can actually choose to apply those updated standards, but that's in the applicant's discretion. That's not in the city's discretion.
That's interesting.
Yes, that's as of last year. There's also a relatively new requirement in state law that standards, conditions, and procedures regulating housing development, and now tree removal, must be clear and objective as of this year. Yep.
To put their money wherever.
So this standard is it seems clear on its face, but as applied, it can be pretty difficult and burdensome to actually accomplish. Applying clear and objective criteria can be a highly fact-intensive process. It can also require a lot of time and effort spent with experts and staff drafting these criteria. You can provide an alternate discretionary path in your code as long as there is also a clear and objective path available. And a common example of this is a clear and objective subdivision or partition option, and then an alternate discretionary PUD, planned unit development option. And I just have to note about the tree codes here. So then finally, just some constitutional issues.
Then I have something about the tree thing. Someone's got land, the city, and they have a whole bunch of oak trees on, but they clear it before they apply for the planning commission. So nothing is wrong with that, is that correct?
There's nothing in the city's code that precludes a property owner from taking out trees on their land.
Correct.
So yeah, so you have the ability at a local level to regulate tree removal in both a municipal context and a development context. So what I mean by that is in the context of development, if you were planning to remove trees, and then also just in your general life, owning a property, if you want to remove trees. You have that ability to regulate that. It sounds like Philomath doesn't. But for the cities that do, and for the cities that regulate it in the context of development, now it has to be clear and objective.
In our development code, it's any property 2 acres or more that's submitting for a development application of some sort. They do have to protect those trees, they have to do a plan, they have to show what's going to be affected, what's not. But the code bar is pretty low. If the applicant could show that that's where a house or a hydrant or a road or whatever needs to be for my development to work, then it's allowed to be removed.
Well, they just took down a bunch of trees in my thought here. No, it really happened. And then, like 2 days later, they applied to put up some houses.
They read our code.
It sounds like under your current code, that would be permissive.
Which would be a legislative decision.
It would be a legislative
So we could
decision.
change that.
Perhaps we should.
And just for the record, we have tried in the past, and at the time, the council was not in favor of putting the regulation
I
in
would
place.
say
So.
tree codes and sign codes could be two of the most controversial topics that you all will undertake as elected officials, in my opinion.
Oh, well, that's good. We already have a sign thing, so let's.
Yeah,
add a
we're
tree.
working on that for next week.
One down, one down.
I had just a clear and objective thing. What does that mean? Like, I don't understand how a tree code would not be clear and objective. Like, it's a tree, is it? I don't know what, like, what's a subjective tree code?
That's a can.
All right, well, I could talk about this for the rest of the night. So,
Yeah.
similar, this is going to be a heavily litigated area in the near future. This is the hot topic for land use lawyers. So I guess to say it very broadly, think about the sorts of things that you value in housing and in trees, and then try to make that objective.
But I guess that's like.
So for
Heritage
example,
trees or-
shade. How do you make shade clear and objective? How do you make the
Is there
environmental,
above you?
but when do you measure those leaves? In the summer, in the winter? Do you measure that as a particular circumference? Do you measure it based on the species? Do you measure it the same for every species if it's mature versus when it's junior, when it's like an immature tree?
Okay.
It's again, on the surface, it seems very simple, but when you start to get into those sort of details, it can take years drafting with an arborist and others qualified professionals to actually get those sorts of details hammered out.
Housing, because I think that's a lot more objective. Like, is it red?
Very similar. So what about, design criteria as far as aesthetics? When we have like a design review board or like a historic review board, right? And you're talking about the impact on the community.
Right,
How is
sure.
how is that objective? Or when you give elected officials the discretion to consider something or not consider something.
Okay.
That is subjective because you're giving them discretion to make a particular decision.
Okay, so we could still have like design standards that just say like, here's like approved colors and approved materials.
But then you start to get into the details of what is green, yes. Yes.
Be clear.
Yeah, okay.
So if I understand correctly, though, I would think that more of the issues that would come up regarding clear and objective would have more to do with like whether something outweighs another thing. So like, is this tree important enough to keep it there in order to put a house stick? Or like, is that kind of more the clear and objective types of, or like, yes, we could benefit from additional housing here, but for whatever reason, water is, like, we can't get water delivered here or something like that.
Yeah, I guess so there's a fairly common example in a housing development context, right? Something would be difficult, right? It would be financially burdensome. How do you quantify financial burden and who gets to quantify it, right? If there's any subjectivity in a standard and there's room for some interpretation where maybe one counselor will have a certain opinion, another counselor will have another, and the applicant will have a third, that's something that's not objective. So you have to set a metric rather than saying financially burdensome. You have to say increases your cost by 150%, right? There's something that, and then what is cost, right? Are you considering the ancillary costs or just the direct costs, right? So you start to get into those lots of details. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think of like other kinds of decisions where we've talked about like, well, yes, maybe we want to increase housing density in this area or something, but we don't have enough water, or like, I don't know, there's too much I can't brain right
No,
now.
that's okay. No, I hear what you're saying, yeah, because that is part of the challenge, right? Is having these general goals and these concepts and then translating them into something clear and objective, right? And that's the difficulty of this statutory requirement in the context of housing and trees.
Extreme example of water, since that's on the table, just to go to the extremes would be, objective or subjective, I guess, would be, the city council shall determine whether they believe there's sufficient water to be able to provide for a future development.
Yeah.
Very subjective, right? It's like, well, I believe we have enough water. Well, I don't think we do, right? In fact, I think the earth is drying up and we don't have any more water, so no more development. Banana, right? The other side would be, I code language now is roughly, the city has to show that the city has sufficient water. Here, we have sufficient water to provide for maximum density of the property. That's pretty objective, right? We can look very closely and say this many units, this much water per unit, per dwelling unit. The city has this much water that we produce. We have this much in excess that we produce. We can run the numbers and we can show that we have sufficient water for that development, right? So there's definitely ways that you can take things that would otherwise be kind of subjective and make them objective by putting the metrics in there, having some type of a standard. And the whole purpose on this, just to get the root of it, is developers complain all the time that they go to develop a property in the city and they invest a lot of money to get planners and engineers and all that together, and then planning commissioners, 3 yahoos on the planning commission are like, I don't like it. I'm going to fix something. We think it's going to emit too much light into the sky, so we're going to deny the application. Well, that's a lot of money you put forward to large housing development for 3 or 4 planning commissioners to think that it's going to be some subjective thing, right? So the state is trying, and I'm oversimplifying, but the state is really trying to take that subjectivity out of land use in particular, and make it so developers have very clear guidelines on what they're going to be allowed to do and where they can do it without a political will pushing back against them for whatever reason, right? So again, that's very simplifying it, but there is a purpose behind the madness. I don't think it's the state wanting to overregulate. I think they're hearing from constituents with a lot of money, i.e. builders and developers, that the process needs to be more clear, more objective, more streamlined,
Yeah.
less expensive.
The governor's stated goal behind all of these recent legislative amendments is to encourage housing development.
Basically, the state's whims are more important than
They are also coming out with a lot of administrative rulemaking, as far as, guidance that they call clear and objective. So, more to come on that.
right.
Some is guidance, some is mandated. Thankfully, I shouldn't say thankfully, but considering your size, a lot of it doesn't necessarily apply to you.
Questions to that? Last presentation from DLCD, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And sometimes they have a hard time distinguishing between guidance and required.
Right. So constitutional issues, takings are the most common one in the land use context. This is a governmental appropriation of private property, and the government must provide just compensation if they do take private property for a public use. This can be the result of regulations that limit use of property, and it also applies to SDCs per a case that came out last year, Sheets. So more commonly, it can be the result of exactions, meaning conditions of approval that require transfer of private property, such as road dedications, construction of improvements, etc. And these sorts of exactions must meet 2 requirements in order to be constitutional. First, they must have a nexus, which means that there must be a relationship between that exaction and the underlying regulation of the property. You can't just arbitrarily say, there's a development here and across town, we're going to have you build a park. There's no nexus between those 2 things. Also, there must be rough proportionality. So whatever you're requiring, it cannot be so disproportionate to the impact of that development on the community. You cannot require a 20-unit subdivision to build a superhighway. That's not proportionate to their impact on the community. And again, that's oversimplifying, but generally. All right, last topic for tonight, which is some recent land use legislative updates. This past legislative session, 2025. So the 2025 legislative session saw a record number of bills. I don't think there's been anything close to the number of bills that we saw this year in recent prior years. Land use, there were 4, or I should say 3 main bills and then 1 related bill that I'm going to talk about. This is a high-level overview. I also provided Chris a Word doc summary of those bills that provide a little bit more detail. So if you all would like that, I'm sure he can provide that to you all. So the first one is Senate Bill 974, and this establishes timelines for engineering plan review. So those 120-day periods that I mentioned for land use decisions, now that same period also applies to engineering plan reviews. So an application must be deemed complete, and then they have 120 days to review those plans. And also similar consequences for failing to review within that time. The definition of limited land use decision, which is a special category of land use decisions, which I haven't talked about tonight, but basically it's a special little subcategory that has been expanded each year for the past couple of years. And basically there's a state process that you must follow for making those decisions, and it's quicker. It's quicker and simpler for applicants. And previously they included subdivisions and partitions, site review, design review, replats, property line adjustments, non-conforming uses that are extended, altered, or expanded. So those were the 5 that were included originally in limited land use, or at least as of last year. And then now Senate Bill 974 is adding zone changes to higher density residential, bless you, planning unit developments, and variances. So all of those things now will be considered limited land use decisions.
So what's the decree? You have 120 days from application to get through the city council?
To make a final decision on all land use decisions.
Final decision from the council, not just from the planning commission? Because we offer our recommendation and the council votes on it, right?
It depends on the application. Some of them.
Those are quasi judicial.
These ones that I just listed?
Yeah, right.
All of these are in a special category. They're called limited land use. And so quasi judicial, all the things that I just went through as far as, there's additional noticing, there's all the hearing requirements, all of that all applies to quasi judicial generally. Yeah. Limited land use, for whatever reason, the legislature has decided we don't want to go through that whole quasi judicial process for these categories. We're actually going to follow a truncated process. We're going to send less notice, we're going to make it happen quicker, and we're actually not going to hold a public hearing.
It's like type 5?
It's like type 2A.
Okay.
It's like type 2 sub A.
So several of the things that are currently coming to the planning commission as like a type 3 will
just go through you.
It'll just be a type 2.
Well, unless we've heard unofficially that they might change this again next year. So more to come on this.
Well, that means we can focus on code then. You're just the magic man, wave your wand and make it happen, right? Wow. Wow. And I don't
Sometimes there's consequences.
Jeez, man. Yeah. All right, Chris.
Okay.
That's yeah.
No,
right.
It's going to simplify the process for the applicants.
Yeah.
Going to provide less opportunities for surrounding property owners and et cetera, right?
Yep.
General public to be able to come before a planning commission and provide reasons why they don't think that housing development should be approved or not.
Exactly right. It's to streamline the process and make residential development quicker and speed up the local review.
Based on this being applied to the last housing development we did, would we not have seen that? It would have stayed at the staff level.
Yeah.
Unless it was appealed.
Unless it was appealed.
The appeal would come to you.
Okay.
Is that the cluster?
No, I'm asking about Knoll Heights.
No Heights. Yeah. subdivision would have been handled under local land use.
Yeah, any,
Would Mill Pond have not even?
no, because that's a PUD, right?
No, I
Okay.
mean, that one had it was a small annexation, zone change, not a lot.
So if it was a zone change to a higher density
It
residential,
was a master plan, so typically, essentially a PDU, land unit or PUD.
yeah, PUDs also are limited land use. So upzone, PUD, both would be staff level decision.
This would, I mean, in my
We gotta get you a planner.
perspective, yeah, yeah, absolutely, but also just that right there. My takeaway from that is the planning commission really needs to have our code like set so that there is,
Yeah, so we're following state law
I get
going
it.
forward.
Yes.
And that's always how it works. State law,
Yes.
if there's conflicting language in your code with state law will apply.
But when state law changes on a whim and there's rumblings like, this doesn't work, this doesn't work, and that may change again, we're gonna be a little slow on going through the process of making our entire development code around new state law. But what sticks around in state law eventually will need to reflect in our.
I'll just get you my draft. We'll work from it, I guess.
So now, George, getting more multiple family.
No, I
Quicker.
And this particular definition has changed the last 3 years in a row. So this is a particular area that is, and we've already been told there will likely be further changes next year. So
Was it Senate bill last year?
last year it was 1537. All right, and then the final thing that this bill does is it prohibits the application of residential design standards to housing development unless it's a multifamily structure development or fewer than residential units. So this, or fewer than 20 residential units, I apologize. So this is confusing. So basically what it means is that if you have a development that's larger than 20 residential units, you cannot apply residential design standards. And residential design standards are basically aesthetics. You can still require building code requirements. You can still require, the engineering standards.
So you use word aesthetics.
It's more
Building
specific.
heights, site coverage, setbacks, is that?
Parking.
Building, it's all listed out in, I can stop sharing and check the statute.
It's walls and balconies and
That's exactly right.
setbacks and windows.
Going off
So
of memory.
so just from an operational point of view, so all residential standards as far as lot sizes and that type of
Those are
thing.
permitted.
Those are permitted.
Those are allowed, I
But
should say.
setbacks.
Setbacks are allowed, I
Setbacks are
believe.
allowed.
These are more,
But projections into the setbacks, is that what we're talking about here?
not necessarily. These are such as, finishings, right?
Materials,
Materials or,
which we don't regulate,
Not for residential.
not for residential in this city.
there are additional criteria.
Yeah, we look at these mostly when large apartments come in, and we mostly deal with them at the staff level before an application gets submitted, because if not, it kind of dies. And so we were very quick to point those out to the architects to look at, but it's essentially, as I talked about,
So
how many feet can you go without having a balcony or an inset or some type of a.
It's in our
design feature
development
So you
code.
don't end up with
So-
a 100-foot wall.
But it's in our development code.
So it's what's in your development code. It's standards intended to preserve desired character, architectural expression, decorating, or aesthetic quality of new homes, including facade materials, colors, or patterns, roof decoration, form, or materials, accessories, materials, or finishes for entry doors or garages, window elements, fence types, architectural details like ornaments, railings, cornices, columns. You get the picture.
I get what you're saying.
Quick question.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So I'm confused with the wording here. Unless it's a multifamily structure development or fewer than 20?
Yeah, the bill is a double negative. So it's
Do make a right.
So, because that feels like, so it's like, oh, if you're less than 20, it doesn't apply.
Right.
And if you're a multifamily structure.
It, yeah, I'm trying to multitask.
If I'm building a large apartment complex.
It can be ugly.
But it doesn't prohibit it unless it's a multifamily structure. And isn't an apartment complex a multifamily structure?
And multifamily structure is also defined in the bill. So
This language stuff.
a multifamily structure.
So like, it would have to be like, I'd have to be building like 30 units, not as a multifamily structure.
A multifamily structure could be a duplex.
But
you have to do 30 duplexes, not 30 single family.
It's a structure that contains 3 or more housing units sharing at least one wall, floor, or ceiling surface in common with another unit within the same structure.
And design standards for that.
Correct.
Okay. So the only thing you can't have design standards for is units with less than 3 in.
No, above 20.
But like, yeah.
Or developments that are above 20.
Basically, a developer comes in and does 100 units.
Right, but like single family.
It could be ugly. You can do
Only
it.
like single.
You did it at 12 units. If we had the standards, it would be in play.
Yeah, this one was not the most clearly drafted.
Let's do
Yes.
Yes.
38, so we don't take.
It's important.
Yeah, no, it's very important to understand. And we're, again, with a lot of these bills, there is a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm saying, previous trends might not be the same as future trends for litigation, right? Because all these questions are great ones, and they're things that have not necessarily been answered in the statutes, right? And so all right, so House Bill 2138, this was the governor's bill. So this was her priority for the legislative session. All land use. These are just high level summaries. So again, if you want to get into these details, we can, but they're not necessarily here in this presentation. The bill generally permits greater middle housing density. It also expressly requires tree codes to be clear and objective, as I mentioned. It also removes certain middle housing land division requirements and makes the process generally simpler and quicker for developers. It allows you to adopt your own local process for middle housing land divisions. I don't know how often you all deal with middle housing land divisions, but
We'll be doing more.
yeah, so that will be a follow-up conversation. And then it also amends the expedited land division process. And interestingly declares them to be land use decisions, which they were not before clearly in the state statute. Right. And then we have the sidewalks bill. This is not operative for Philomath until 2031. So for now, it's just something to bear in mind.
Is that taking into consideration? Are we saying 2031 because that's a projection of population?
That's in the statute.
It's just in the statute.
So it's any cities that are below 15,000 in population, this statute doesn't apply until 2031.
Understood. Thank you.
And it limits a city's authority to require infrastructure improvements as a condition of approval. It's a lot more limited than that. There's, again, kind of specific contexts when you're allowed to still require infrastructure improvements. It's fairly limited. So we can have that conversation in a couple of years when we get there. And then
still require sidewalks by the landowner.
For now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Until 2031. And then there are limited contexts when you still can. And then I have a note about a House bill that's not on this presentation. It's not necessarily directly related to local land use, but it's still relevant to you all. And this is House Bill 3144. This amends statute to make recorded instruments that affect real property and governing documents regulating housing that prohibit manufactured dwelling development, prefab structure development, ADUs, and middle housing unenforceable. So essentially what that means is if you have a CCNRs for your HOA, or you have a restricted covenant on a property or a deed, none of those documents can prohibit housing, manufactured dwelling development, prefab dwelling development, or ADUs.
That applies to existing CCNRs?
No, that's in the future.
In the future.
That's future, correct. All right. And then finally, just a note on the Housing Accountability and Production Office. This is an entity that was created last year in Senate Bill 1537, and they are here. They're here and they are acting. So they are something to be aware of. They have a multifaceted role. They are providing housing production through research and guidance, navigating state resources and processes for local governments, but then kind of crucially, and something that hasn't been discussed quite as much, ensure local compliance with state housing laws. What this enforcement arm of HAPA will look like is yet to be determined, but they have discussed in open meetings that they've had about an additional local review process, or local appeal process, in addition to the land use board of appeals process, where they can hear local disagreements about housing related land use laws.
You're writing the model code?
Great question. They have produced a few different PDF documents of a proposed procedure for these things. They have not, as far as we've found, gone through any sort of rulemaking process, which is typically what's required for state agencies. I believe at this time, they've held two public hearings, or two public meetings, I should say, where members of the public could attend. But I think that's the extent.
That's their website address.
Correct.
Great, thank you.
And those documents that I mentioned, those two PDFs, as far as their guiding documents that we've seen thus far, those are on that website. And that's everything. Thank you for bearing with me through that long presentation. It wasn't too boring, but I appreciate your attention. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them here.
Extremely helpful.
Yeah.
You're very knowledgeable and you're impressive. You know all this stuff.
I know that my review of the land use legislative updates was kind of high level, so if you have specific questions, more specific, after you've looked through the Word doc that I sent out, I'm always happy to try to discuss those, and Chris's permission, of course. But there is going to be a lot of interpretation moving forward, I think, of those.
The land use, all of this legislation relates to incorporated entities, cities? Or is it all lands within the state?
That's a great question. I focused on cities for my presentation. There were also other land use related legislative updates that applied more to counties. I did not go over those in this meeting.
Specifically for cities?
Yes, I tried to focus just on cities.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. This was way from the beginning. You know, it says a decision on application is based on pre-existing criteria, which is mentioned. As we know, if we've had anybody that's been involved with a hearing, most, other than maybe the application, because they'll have a person qualified to talk for them. But most people that come and talk after that, they're not addressing the criteria necessarily. I mean, I recall myself back when we just would sit there and listen to it, but I suspect the chair could say, you're not addressing the criteria and say, go away or whatever, but, I mean, I assume the recommendation is just listen to it, sort of ignore it when you're done.
It's kind of sad to say, but yes. Often I think members of the public are satisfied just with being able to show up, participate in the public process, have a platform to be able to share their public opinion about a particular topic. And educating on these legal standards can be sometimes difficult, even if a chair will state and restate throughout the hearing the criteria and how the evidence must apply to the criteria. So, but still having that ability to just testify publicly can do a lot for certain members of the public who feel like a decision is, not in their best interest, whether it's the criteria or not.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I'll give the example. I think one of my big concerns in moving fewer of these or more of these out of the land use, the open land use process that we've kind of normalized in Oregon is just that. I said, I think we'll have more neighbors that don't feel like they're being heard and feel like housing is just being pushed onto the cities, and they're exactly right. That is what's happening. We're losing a voice at the local level to be able to appeal to those things. And so all the more important where we do have opportunities within our development code to have clear and objective standards that allow for these things and don't allow for other things, so long as it's legal to do so, that it just adds the importance of doing that, because we're not gonna have that threshold of get in front of the planning commission and be able to let those things out as much. We will still notice public, and we will still get letters that come in, and maybe even more so if they know they can't come down here, and maybe they're more apt to write a letter, get some submitted, and that'll give them standing, just as always. But it's changing. It'll be different. I mean, the number of types of applications come to the planning commission of the stuff you typically do. I mean, it's it'll be like a quarter of what you usually hear.
I think it could really go either way, right? You could either see many, many more appeals, because that's the only way to come into the public, to a public hearing is now to have an appeal of a limited land use decision. Or if people aren't getting the notice or aren't looking on cities' websites, then there could just be more staff decisions.
And basically, if this is a staff decision and they appeal it, then it goes to the planning commission, then it goes to the city council, then it goes to, those are the different steps that it'll have to go through in the appeals process.
It is permitted if that's in your code. So we should adopt, if that's what you want, if you want to be able to have that public hearing upon appeal at a local level, then that is something that I would recommend putting into our code.
So the law doesn't predetermine that.
No.
It's up to our.
For the appeal context, no. It says you can, but not that you must.
That's important.
Would there be a cost to a citizen who wants to appeal just to the planning commission?
That's up to you all.
It currently is.
So what is it?
The bill's 2,000 or 2,500, one of those two for the appeal to the planning commission.
But currently it's because it's been typically used by a person that had their their application denied.
Hearing.
Yeah, it would be from somebody
Hearing.
speaking.
Yeah, I think on the RV development specifically, the planning commission denied it, so the applicant appealed. So they paid the appeal, it came to the city council approved it, and then somebody was standing that testified, appealed the city council's decision to LUBA. So we had to send all the information to LUBA, and they had to review it, and then upheld the city council's decision. And then there was back and forth, not appeals, but questions back and forth with the attorneys on that. The dollar amount, but after several months of that, I think they finally got issued an invoice from Luba for all of the time that they'd spent arguing back and forth with it. They just said it was a final decision and now we've incurred X amount of expenses. And sent it off. And so in addition to your application fee for the appeal, we're also issuing an invoice for, it was $500, $800, something like that in addition to. So it's around straightforward. But, and I, a lot of my precautions, a lot of times we don't want this to go to Luba, right? A lot of the precautions that I give on individuals to applicants, the planning commission members who have concerns, is we want to avoid having this go to Luba. We don't want the appeal, right? And some people go into here, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter which side, one side or the other is going to appeal anyway. That's a really bad way to go to it. I mean, we really should try to get to some type of an agreement based on the criteria, where we can get a decision that's defensible and hopefully avoids going and getting appealed at all because it's so defensible, right? I mean, if you can make it that out, it's like, this is, bulletproof, for lack of a better term, then maybe you've taken some of the ammunition away from the other side to even want to appeal it. But if you go into it haphazard and like, oh yeah, we know it's gonna get appealed anyway, and you don't do your due diligence to establish the criteria or to address all of the criteria properly, you just open yourself up for an appeal, and as you should, right? I mean, if you haven't done your due diligence, then they should appeal it and argue those points. So anyway, we try to, every one of those applications that go through, not to say that staff doesn't make mistakes, but we always go into it that we want to be very, very thorough. I mean, we literally copy and paste the criteria out of our code onto our application and then into our staff reports. It's like word for word, copy paste. You see exactly what the code requires, and then we address every single one of those. Or we put that it's not applicable and why it's not applicable. So I think on our side, our staff does a really, really good job doing that. Our trick right now is just copy pasting from our development code isn't going to be sufficient for a while because we've got new state regulations that our old code didn't comply with that we're going to need to be addressing more regularly. So that'll be a little bit of a twist on things just to keep things interesting, right? Overall, city does a great job. We're in really good hands, and attorney's great peer resource for us.
There is one other place, and not in the immediate, but I would encourage the council to, and I would assume every city council should bring this up, with the League of Oregon Cities. If the league could get together on a lot of this stuff, I think they could have some impact on what the legislature does. I mean, you probably already heard about the thing with the counties and the farmers that have, hay rides and all that stuff. I assume you've just heard about that in the last few days. Well, people went nuts over it, and the governor took it back for now. Right. I understand that, but I mean, pressure can't apply.
Yes.
Well, I'll say the league, in my experience, does a lot of lobbying. Our firm goes to a lot of those land use legislative, sessions, and we participate to the extent that we can in trying to move the needle. We did that with this 120-day building permit. Originally, they wanted to have 30 days. And so thankfully,
you've done that already.
Yeah.
We are, and this is even with that, right? So we're doing what we can.
I'll just say one thing on that too, from working at the Capitol. The LOC lobbyists are out there doing their jobs, but if you're a legislator and you get a call from an LOC lobbyist versus you get a call from a mayor or a city councilor or a planning commissioner or a city manager in your district, one of those is going to leave a much bigger impact on that legislator. So just, I think LOC has really good resources. They give you good talking points, but legislators sit there all day and a million different lobbyists come knocking on their doors asking them to do things. But if, a mayor or a resident in their district calls them and is like, hey, this is going to hurt my town in this specific way, that will go a lot further than just, a lobbyist handing them a paper talking with bullet points about blah, blah, blah. So.
And during the legislative session, LOC gives weekly updates, and they'll say, if your cities that you represent are interested in particular topics, please have them contact XYZ, and so when I get those land use related ones or other ones, I'll try to pass them to Chris and say, hey, this bill's moving forward. Let your elected officials know if they want to show up and testify.
Yeah, and I'll call her. I'll give kudos to our mayor who again, happens to work at the Capitol. I think, Philomath and our interests were better represented this year than they've ever been. Because, he's a little bit more involved and willing to speak out and, it's a little more convenient, but even still, he sacrificed some of his own personal time. I know for a fact that he punched his card and took personal time to go out and testify on behalf of the city or talk to a legislator on behalf of the city, and then left that one, punched the card back, and now you guys have cards you punch in. I know he took considerable amount of personal time to represent us and our interests at the city level. So I appreciate that. I want to commend him for that. And a lot of that, again, the city council did a nice job of kind of giving him the reins and kind of gave him open. If you believe it's in the best interest of the city, you don't have to come back and ask for permission from us on every person you're talking to. If it's in our best interest, and absolutely go forward. And so I think that's worked well. And he's done great at reporting back to us on who he's been talking to and everything. But anyway, it's commendable, and we do have a voice there at the Capitol, and that's something we've been working on the last several years. And current mayor's just made that avenue even straighter, which has been great. So appreciate his efforts.
Thank you very much. Josh?
The raise.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions for Ashley? Online, I want to make sure I'm not missing you up there. Anything on your mind? Okay. Okay. Well then, thank you all for doing this joint work session. Thank you to Ashley for your presentation. Very helpful. And City Council and Planning, I guess everyone, don't forget the grand reopening of Triangle Park is tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. We'll have popsicles and face painting and fun activities. And then the City Council will meet again on, is it August 11? Yes. Yes, we'll have another very busy day on August 11th. So I'll see you all then. I don't remember when the next Planning Commission meeting is, but I trust that you do. So I won't see you then. Oh, 18th. Perfect. All right. So then we'll adjourn at 9:13 p.m.